Hi, folks. We are hot. Welcome to the share around section of the Tuesday Night Live. Well, Kenny and I share this to all of the Facebook groups and pages that we like to share it to. Ethan, feel free to snag it and put it on your tracking page or wherever you might want to share it to. This is the boring section of the stream while we let people jump on. Look over the comments here. Okay. Good evening, 6 folks, 7 folks joining, and the 1 thumbs up. Hi, Dylan. Evening, buddy. Again, those that may be just joining, we are sharing it around, and we'll kick it off here momentarily. Let's see, there's another one somewhere here. All right, Ken, you got it shared?
Yes, sir.
I did too, man. Let me plug it in. Ethan, you got it shared? Yes, sir. That's what I thought you said. Nicely done, Ethan. Let the music play, boys. Here we go. Oops. Hey, Brian. Hello, followers. Welcome to the Tuesday Night Live with Kenny, and today with Ethan. Ethan Young's joining us today as we quite potentially wrap up the training series. Today, guys, is where the rubber meets the road. We spent the last, this is looking like it's going to be a 3-part series, potentially 4-part, depending on how it flows today. Probably a 3-part series. Parts 1 and parts 2 were some foundational things, some science nerd stuff on part 2 when we talk about scent. And that's important. If you haven't listened to it, I'd encourage you guys to go either to YouTube or back through on Facebook and give it a watch and or listen. It'll be, Kenny, have you got last week's on Spotify yet? It will be soon if it's not yet.
Yes, I actually got it on today. I was running behind. So the last few days I have been completely bombarded with some things that we've been working on, and as well as a lot of people reaching out for training advice. So it did delay things, but it should be live right now on Spotify. I literally finished it like 15 minutes ago. And then I believe it's iHeart and Apple. One of the two takes an extra day. I believe it's iHeart.
Okay.
But it'll be up there. And James Tucker, yes, we are streaming this on YouTube. Literally got it fixed right before we went live. So it is on the American Blood Trackers YouTube.
Yep. Saves me a step for having to download and upload it later. So cool. So yeah. Spotify. I get a lot of people asking if it who aren't able to watch on Tuesdays, Kenny. So they like to put in their earbuds at work and stuff. So they like the podcast platform. So, and I tell them they're just typically a week or so behind intentionally. But so we're there now. So good. So the rubber meets the road. We lost Ethan, so he must have had some connection troubles. He'll pop back on when he gets it sorted. But so like I was saying last week, a lot of science and sense stuff. If you get a chance, go watch it. We talk about some foundational things that might help you understand. If your dog is as you're working with the dog and it doesn't seem to be going well, depending on the age of the dog. It could be multiple things, but that scent understanding could be part of it. And we drove pretty deep, and we still only scratched the surface. So it's worth listening to because it helps round you out as a tractor. It helps you become more in tune. But more in tune, it helps your tracking acumen, I guess, but how everything comes together. But today, like I said, is where the rubber meets the road. We're talking about the dog and you and what to do. The dog and you and what to do. What'd you post, Kenny? How how failure, succeeding through failure, and we air quote failure because I don't consider what we talked about last night as failure. But some might, and it's all about perspective, and that's
Right.
that's the really really cool stuff that I think we're going to get into, But before we do, as we're shouting out again the hard work of the subcommittees, or excuse me, of the committees of the ABTA. You mentioned it. We spent 4 hours on the phone or on a meeting last night with a testing committee. 3 hours of it was agenda items and. Ethan, I'm going to presume you're there at least audio.
I'm here. My apologies.
All right. 3 hours was working off the agenda, which Ethan is the chairman of that committee. In the third hour or fourth hour was just other great relevant topics that are just going to help us solidify our footprint in the strength of our organization. Kim, you want to comment on anything?
Yeah, I do want to share something that Matt, you may not even be aware of, but Ethan and I have been working on something this morning, which we kind of touched on a little bit last night on the committee meeting, but I want to share it here now. We finalized the elite test last night as part of that committee meeting.
Yep.
And then we talked about a natural abilities assessment. Well, Ethan and I have we started on that this morning, and I think we pretty much got it nailed down. We just got to get it in writing, and that falls right in line with what we're doing here. And I'm not going to dive into the whole testing platform per se, but I am going to say this: if you follow our whole progression through the testing outline or program, you can train a dog through it. And so what we found is that started level test, you got to put in some work to pass that. It's not super hard, but you got to put in the work. Well, there's some people who may not know how to get there.
Right.
So we are developing this, natural abilities evaluation assessment, to help establish a baseline for you and your dog. And what you're going to do, you're going to come, we're going to lay a pretty basic line. It'd be probably a little more than the average starting dog can fully complete, but it'll help us establish a baseline. Then after that is over with, we are going to show you how to lay that line. We're going to lay a line with you based on the baseline that we've established from the first line. And then the judge will guide you through the process to get to the next level for that started level test.
And that's great. It's just the kind of the I'll call it the preschool to to the big school. You know, the kindergarten class to get you prepared for. I think that's awesome, and it's not as what you said. I like what you said. It's not as much about the dog as it is about the handler and setting the handler up for success and setting them on a course to be successful with some foundational understanding of training principles and things. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to put this out there, and I don't know if you'll agree, Ethan, but I would wager to say that at least 90% of it, of the challenges and errors made along the training is handler.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think so. Maybe a little higher. I mean, all we're doing is really channeling the natural ability dog.
Channeling the natural ability dog and putting it in scenarios that the dog can develop the natural abilities.
Right. I mean, they have the ability.
Yeah.
If a dog got loose and had to become feral, guess what? They're going to survive. All these instincts are going to kick in, and they're going to do their job. They're going to hunt.
That's right.
Yep. And what we're going to do is lay out how to bring that out to what we want.
Yep. Yeah, focus it on the mission that we have. So before we go much further, I do want to just mention, for those that don't know, Ethan Young is also a dog trainer. Ethan, what's the name of your training service?
Hunt Dog. Pretty straightforward. Yeah, Hunt Dog.
Hunt Dog, pretty straightforward. And where are you located?
South Arkansas.
Arkansas.
A place called Marysville. We have a water department. We don't have a population or anything. If we ever have a house fire, somebody has to come and unlock the fireplace, I guess, and get the folks out. It's time.
Yeah. But Kenny mentioned it last night because Ethan is also a judge, an ABTA judge, and the chairman of the testing committee. So, Ethan joined us before when we did the Duval's the Duval after action review. Ethan, you were on to talk about that, and so Kenny mentioned maybe it'd be worth having Ethan on as we are where the rubber meets the road and have two bona fide legitimate trainers on, and then one pretty face. So so we're clear, I will be playing the role of the pretty face today while you guys talk about the great things that you're going to talk about, and I'm going to chime in and nod a lot and pretend like, oh yeah, of course,
Well, you definitely have the face for radio and podcast.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure my kids would agree with you, by the way, man. That's funny. No, but no, seriousness, man. Ethan, you're doing some yeoman's work truly in that in the testing committee, because the bullets were flying, man, last night and the nights before with 5 or 6 people with a lot of great ideas, and you're catching those bullets and putting them in print for us. So well done, man. And yeah, and I look forward to your contributions to the training segment. So let's get into it, Kenny and Ethan. Here we are. We've talked about nerd science stuff, a little bit of scent theory, what creates scent, picking a puppy. We have our puppy. We're ready, and we're to the point where we want to start training it to track wounded game. Go.
Let me ask you this, Matt. How old's your puppy?
How old is my puppy?
Yeah, how old's the puppy you're wanting to start training?
My puppy is 10 weeks old.
All right. What you got, Ethan?
You know what I got? Old puppy. I just got a puppy at Christmas at Catahoula, and the litter he came out of, I think all of those went to tracking homes, and I saw a lot of folks posting videos of doing stuff with their dog, like liver drags and hoof tracks and what have you. And maybe this is a little bit of the landscaper has the worst lawn, but to me, I don't really. Genetically, he should have it there. So what I've been spending my time doing is making sure that dog thinks I'm awesome and he's not scared of anything in the environment. He thinks people are cool. He's real comfy in the woods and pretty much comes to me when I call. Other than that, I didn't really touch anything except for he might have found some hooves in the back of my truck here and there. But he's 4 months old now, and we have just started formal work, and I'm in no rush still. And by formal work, I mean we played with hide a little, and I've shown him like 100-yard track, and that's it, and a lot of obedience. And
so I chose 10 weeks old, Kenny, and you can comment too, but I said that on purpose because I knew, when we've talked about this in I think part 1 of the training series, when they're that young, unless you want to just do it just to play a fun little game, when we're talking about the actual tracking training, there's no need to do it that early, and perhaps if done properly could be detrimental. That's the time to focus on the things that Ethan just talked about, and the bonding, the obedience, and all of that. So, but go ahead and share your thoughts on it to expand on.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Ethan and I we're the same mindset there. I can tell you, if you bring me a dog, if you book training with me, I don't even want to see that dog till it's 6 months old.
Yeah.
Now, for a person, I get it. You get a puppy, you're eager, you want to get out there and work it. Just at that age, first things are first, and that is obedience. Some people they'll do flirt polls, like Vicky just commented.
Yep.
And that's fine. I mean, have fun with the puppy, but you really need to nail down that bonding and obedience. And where does the bonding come from? The bonding comes from the obedience. So work on that. At least until they're 4 months old. You really need to focus on all those things. Start with your basics, your sit. If you want to teach stay, that's fine. Sit means sit, and stay for me, I like to minimize my commands. Here, come, whatever you want to use. Work on socialization. And by socialization, we talked about it before, but it's not just people, environmental socialization. I'm sure Ethan's seen this, but I get dogs that come in and we'll go in the woods and there'll be an old piece of pottery or a piece of pipe, and the dog just freaks out because it's never seen anything like that.
Well, let's set on that one for a minute, Kenny, because you started talking about that. A lot of things started coming to mind, and other things I've read and things I've seen people talk about. If we're talking about we're talking about tracking training here. We're involved in all kinds of different scenarios. We're traveling to different places. We're seeing one person to a whole band of merry men, right? And we might have to take a boat to get to the island, to get to the swamp where the deer was shot. We might have to take a gator. So exposing your dog to all of these types of scenarios in the right way, four-wheelers, noises. My dog is very gun shy. I hope I never have to dispatch in the field. I will someday. That's something I admittedly need to work on. So not just walking through the woods and different environmental things, the Lowe's and the Home Depots or wherever they're allowed to take them for that social, all of that, but car rides, ATV rides, boat rides, all of that kind of stuff is to start breaking them in on that.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a lot of things that people overlook, especially four-wheelers, boats. My buddy Jason Byer, he had to put his dog on an airboat. Airboats are loud.
Yeah.
But in our area, some people hunt from those, and that's, these are things that, you got to work on. Loading up in a truck. Like you said, riding around, those are all big things.
Yep.
So, but I will say this, probably the biggest one that I think should be taught prior to any real tracking training is collar conditioning.
Okay, so let's spend some time on that, because Me personally, I spent zero time on that other than what she was accustomed to for my underground fencing. And when I started to work off lead, that was a problem because that tone meant really bad things for her, and I didn't go about it right. So, and there's a lot of people, talking about wanting to go to off lead. So let's set on this one, man. Spend a little bit of time here.
Well, before we do that, I want to say it's not just about off lead, even on lead.
Of course, yes, yes.
It's only a matter of time when you lose a dog. You slip and fall, drop a lead.
Yes,
they pull out of. I had my bloodhound pull out of his harness.
Yes,
a lot of things go on. So I do want to stress that even for on lead tracking, you should have the ability to recall your dog remotely, whether it's an e-collar, a whistle. I recommend a tracking collar so that you do have the ability to find them on a GPS if they get too far out of range. So, and I kind of touched on how to do that in a previous, I believe it was 2 live streams ago. I touched on the basics of how to collar condition a dog. And
yeah, you did.
I don't know if you, Ethan, were you able to hear that one?
Guilty. No, I hadn't gone on there. I apologize.
Yeah, so I'll just do like a quick rundown. Is basically the dog should know the command prior to the verbal command prior to working with an e-collar. That's the first step. The second step is basically put the collar on the dog on a long rope. Let the dog roam around. And I like to hit the tone button, give the command, and hold it down until it comes to me, and then I let it go. And I'll repeat that till they get it down. And then as far as the stimulation goes, or shock, as some people want to term it, start at your lowest setting and work your way up till you see a reaction from the dog. And by reaction, I don't mean it doing backflips and yelping. It's just a slight reaction that you got their attention. So that's just a quick rundown. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not too awful different. I kind of, I use it for punishment as well sometimes, but I won't go into that. I mean, it's rare, but like, to me, recall means just come touch my hand. So verbal or just like a physical cue, whatever. I get that, like you said, very fluent before I pair it with the tone or the vibration. But I use tone. I do the exact same thing. Dog name, and when they're paying attention to me, I'm here, and then hold my hand out. And it's very clear to the dog what I'm asking it to do, which is come touch my hand with your nose and stay engaged until I release you. But yeah, the order matters as well. If you're conditioning dogs to things in the behavioral sense, I'm giving the command like with the tone, and then either my physical cue or my other one that's already conditioned, and just kind of back chaining that. And once you have that already on cue, when you put the collar on, it happens super quick. And then on the conditioning for like stimulation, most of the time when I'm using that, it's to like interrupt higher arousal levels. And I'll climb, because 99% of what I do with the e-collar is just the tone, but I will occasionally like they're clearly in a high drive state, or they've got big floppy ears and they're going away from me. And I'm like, I'm not sure they're, in the right state of mind to even notice that I'm holding that tone down. And I'll give them a buzz, give them a few seconds, especially, make sure your collar's like update rate is reasonable and you're not just like frying them because they're not coming back, but your update rate is like 60 seconds and you can't even tell where they are. But
right.
So I'll be kind of climbing until it's just like clearly they're aware that I'm giving them that recall. And I won't go into that, but I do also do some like negative reinforcement with the collar on things, and they already have a fluency with that and dealing with turning off pressure from leash work. But you can get some crispy obedience by overlaying some e-collar with it as well, but not necessary. Most of what I do is just that tone, and exactly like you, I'm holding it down until they touch my hand, and then it comes off.
One thing I want to add is you need to know the baseline for that dog. Not all dogs' stimulus level is the same.
100%.
I would say on average, if I had to place an average number on it for a Garmin, it's 3 to 4 on average, and that's to
High
get
or
a
low
reaction. What's
high
that?
or low setting? 3 or 4 on the high or low setting.
Typically on the low.
Okay, I just want to qualify because it's
Yeah. There is a high and a low on the Garmin. There wasn't before. There was just one. But typically, what I see on average is a setting of 3 to 4. You will have some dogs like my lab. He's about a 6. And then if he's pumped, I may have to go up to 8. But you need to learn that baseline because you can ruin a dog quick. And Michael Beck asked the question, at what age are you introducing an e-collar? I do not introduce it age-wise, not before 4 months old. But even more important than the age is the dog needs to know the command before introducing the collar.
Yeah, and another thing is like introducing stimulation if you're going to use that in the right way, even if it's just like an interrupter, because you don't want to be out in the middle of the woods and like overwhelm them because the first time, they might be fluent in recall and you hit the beep and they don't seem to do it because of whatever their arousal state or whatever they're engaged with, and then you try the stimulation for the first time in a really uncontrolled environment, and all of a sudden your dog just sits down in the middle of the woods or runs off, whatever. Some dogs can't deal with that pressure right away if you haven't, like you said, conditioned them to it. And for me,
that's the word collar conditioning.
Yeah, that starts with the leash to me. But
right, yep, starts with the leash. Everything starts with the leash.
Do you before you go to stim? Do you progress from tone to vibrate to stim?
I personally do not use vibrate unless the client wants vibrate. I'm just a tone person. I like tone.
Yeah, me too, preferably. But when she's being stubborn, I'll throw the vibrate out there. If she really likes the line, she can be a real meathead about coming back sometimes. Now she's getting better, and I'll progress it.
And what breed is that?
Yeah, it's one of the very independent thinking, committed breed.
Yes. So I'll be honest. There's another reason why I use tone and stim. When I set up my Garmin tracking system, on the top buttons, I have a waypoint marker or flag.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
And then I have stim and I have tone.
Yep.
So because I use those things so frequently, if I see a spot of blood, I'm hitting the flag or the waypoint marker. So I have 2 other button options unless I toggle on the side, but I also have 6 collars programmed in there. So for the way that I track and the way that I utilize my Garmin is the reason that I utilize only 2 options of tone and stim.
Yeah, without having to toggle to the secondary menu for your buttons and stuff. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yep. Okay, cool.
So that I feel that should be done prior to any training if you plan to do that, and if you don't, you should. Every dog that goes into the woods should have some form of a tracking collar, or at a bare minimum, a way to recall the dog when it's out of range for your voice or whistle or whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've had 2 very unpleasant experiences before I had once, but I've mentioned it here before, but once before I had any kind of e-collar, let alone being trained on one. And then once after I had it, and that she got loose. And the second time she got loose and I had the collar, I didn't panic. I knew where she was. I could get to her. She wasn't trained not to tone because I was still on lead. I just hadn't got there. But and I didn't I didn't train my dog right. All of the things we're talking about, I didn't do until recently. my next dog will be different. But I was just talking about one of my friends today, who, Alan, I hope you're listening now. His little smooth coat Dotson got away today and earlier, and without a collar, and it was pretty scary for him. So yeah, get a collar, guys. Get an e-collar, even if it's nothing more, to know where your dog is if it slips away. But hopefully you train it to return to tone. But go ahead. I'll digress.
Yeah, so I know people's here for the actual scent training, but we gotta lay that foundation first.
Yeah. Well, it matters because it could be the difference in losing a dog or not. I think it's important to spend some time on this piece of it.
Absolutely, and before hang on just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, someone was asking if we were live, so I had to share that. Anyways, before we even get to this point, we talked about obedience, and the first step in that is leash obedience. If you don't have a good leash obedience, you should not be training for tracking. You need to get that down first, because some may not agree, but I feel every dog, whether you're tracking on lead or off, every dog should be trained on lead.
I think so. I mean, you can control the scenario so much more and make sure what's being learned and reinforced is what you want, and not things that just surprise you in the environment. That's the biggest reason for me.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by control, I don't believe you're talking about steering.
No, I mean control mostly in like we're going out to the woods where just things surprise us, and I don't want some of these hot bred dogs or the dogs that are it's internally reinforcing to just trail random stuff. And if I take them off lead and they just go on their own adventure, they start losing some clarity of what the task we're doing and what standards I'm holding them to. And if I can make sure I can give a direct communication to them immediately if they're like disengaging from the task, as well as keep them from finding something super exciting and running off before I can get them back. That just
Right.
seems to, I can just, like you said, not steer them, but I can control what surprises we have and how they interact with them.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, we've pretty much laid the groundwork. We're ready to get out into the field. And again, I'm going to talk a lot from a trainer's point of view, but also I'm going to shed light on what the average person is probably going to want to do, whether it's right or wrong. That's fine. So when I personally start a dog, again, they typically are going to be 6 months old before they come to me. There are instances where we take some younger, but it's all based on some interviewing the owner about the what's the word I'm looking for, maturity of the dog. But anyways, first thing that I do when I begin some serious training is establishing that baseline, like we talked about before. And we'll get it. I'll kind of get into that in a little bit, but what the average person is going to want to do is work their dog at 10 weeks old.
Yeah, mine was 8 weeks old. Yeah, a little bit.
So we'll go back to that, and I'll just kind of say what I feel is, have some fun if you want, do some little 20-yard drags and put their food at the end or a treat at the end. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to make a tracking dog? No, you got a lot of work after that. But there's nothing wrong with doing that stuff and keep it fun. And you want to keep the dogs engaged at that age. Short work, don't overdo it. Just keep it short and fun.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, when it comes time where you're ready to grind, Someone brings me a dog, I'm going to lay about a 200-yard trail, 190-degree turn. And what I'm looking for is not for that dog to complete it perfectly. I'm looking to see, does the dog engage with that line? If it does, how far can it take it? And, I'm looking for what is, is it remaining focused? How far will it make it on that line? Is it struggling at that 90? Again, at that point, I'm not looking for a flawless track. I am looking just to see what the dog is capable of doing and then going from there.
In essence, establishing that baseline we kind of talked about before, right? For
Correct.
a dog that goes wrong to you, okay, what can this dog do now? So now you have a way to measure its progress or digression. You know where you're at.
Correct. Now, if you read some of the books, they'll say start at 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, and that's fine. A lot of people hasn't trained as many dogs as I have or Ethan has, or so they may not be able to pick up on those cues, what I'm looking for on that 200-yard line. So if you want to start, most dogs will run 20 yards at 10 weeks old, honestly.
Yes.
So my recommendation is, you want to start short, go straight line, 50, 60 yards. That's fine. And that's kind of just where my starting point. You want to share yours, Ethan?
It's almost identical. It's not quite as long. I'm going to be in the 125 to 150 yards. There's no thought beyond that except for I want the 90 to be far enough away. They're not going to, incidentally shortcut and win the end. But yeah, I do the same thing, and I'm just entirely looking for engagement, and I want that 90 there for them to purposefully get off of it and just watch. Do they have any bottom end to get back on their own, and how well do they re-engage if they need a little nudge from me? Most, in my experience, it may take a few minutes of staying in there at times, but most seem to achieve that, and they go from there pretty quick, it seems. But I could easily see, you talk about like keeping it fun. I could easily see if somebody had the expectation that like I got to get through this and it's got to look really nice, what I envision a good tracking dog to look like, and they get out there and just immediately start damaging their relationship with a dog and their dog's relationship with that task right out of the gate. And
Yep.
Never funny for the dog and frustrating for the handler. But yeah, I don't have any expectations except for I'm just kind of watching to see their engagement. If they just don't seem to care, I might nudge them a couple times, like, hey, come check this out, or just use spatial pressure to get them over the line again. And then after that, I'm like, all right, we just leash them up and just go for a walk out of the woods and shorten it and come back tomorrow.
Yeah. Now, what we didn't discuss, Ethan, is how do you lay that line?
I was going to ask that. That was my next question.
Yeah. I throw the hooves on. I don't dig out the wax. I don't hydrate them. I thaw the hooves out, put them on the shoes, and I take off walking in shorter steps than I normally would. I don't know that matters, but the first week I am doing a shorter step and trying to keep it in a line, and I just roll on with that. No blood or nothing.
I'm the same.
I'm pretty simple.
I'm the same way, and we use tracking shoes. John and I use tracking shoes as well, but let me go ahead and tell you, you don't have to have tracking shoes. You can use sticks. They work just fine.
Yeah,
but when you're laying the amount of lines that we do, shoes are much more convenient.
My shoulders got off the tire with those damn tracking poles.
Yeah, I do like them. They have a place.
I think they have the most natural engagement of the hoof to the ground than any shoe. Well, with the exception of maybe the ones that have them on the back, but the Waskows or the buck braids or anything that has a whole thing on the bottom, that pole has the most natural engagement. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. It does have the most natural engagement, but what I don't agree on is the shoes with the hooves on the back. Because it's not just about the engagement with the bottom of the hoof on the ground. You also have the transfer of it brushing against vegetation.
Yeah, and that's right. And I guess I was specific to hoof to ground contact, but when you look at it more holistically, yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, so I would say in that respect, the tracking sticks have a more natural way of laying the line, because you get that natural transfer of that hide contacting vegetation.
Yep. A more complete scent profile, as complete as it can be with 12 inches of a deer leg,
right?
And missing the other 140 pounds.
So, Ethan, what do you do if the dog won't take that hoof only line?
So, I guess my order of problem solving is like we'll just kind of walk around in the woods for a minute. Like I'm the first time they have the long line and they're just still on like a slip lead, just out there with me. And like I don't give a formal command. I don't really spend too much time trying to say like, hey, check this area out or anything. I just kind of naturally walk over it and let it be their own thing that they were like interesting, and then pursued it to their own heart's content. Uh, but if they're just like, oh, okay, and then they just kind of hang out with me, I don't let them just like ramble through the woods. I kind of hold them in that area. But if they just are just like, okay, this is cool, but I'm gonna hang out with you, Uncle Ethan, then I'll just kind of walk around a circle and come back to it after a few minutes and try again. And if that doesn't work, we just leave the woods and come back. And I do. Some people give me flack for it in the ABTA group, but I do some other stuff to kind of get their nose on the ground. And that just is simply one of them is just toss a little kibble in the grass. Make sure you're not like treating that area of your yard with like chemicals or anything, and your dogs are like up to date on their worming. But I'll sling a handful of kibble on the ground and just let them ramble across it and find some goodies here and there. And most of that is just leash them up, leave the woods, come back tomorrow. And I've never had to do that more than like a day, and come back the next day. And it's like if they realize like the options are follow this thing, it's pretty cool, or leave the woods, they tend to follow it. And I reward them at the end of completion with kind of more access to the woods right away, so they're not just deprived of engaging with the environment because of this task. They can access the environment with the task. I hope that answers it. Finish them up and wait.
So I have a few more tactics that I use. So sometimes dogs won't engage with that line with the hoof only. And so one thing I didn't say is what we like to do. And I had a picture. I shared it with Matt, I believe, at one point, or video. I tend to lay the first part of that line in an open area, and I like to have a barrier on each side, such as like I like to use an area that has a blacktop road on one side and some higher vegetation on the other side, and I'll lay that first part of that line down that mowed strip in between the two, and then I will cut into that thicker vegetation or wood line or trees. That way you can see, maybe there's some reservation for them going into those woods. I know that's something that I need to work on. And maybe after that, we just go on a stroll through the woods. It doesn't even matter about scent work. We're just going to go enjoy ourselves and go for a woods walk.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of reducing the novelty of the environment to where it's like you're not trying to introduce this task and you're doing it in an environment that's overwhelming or really enticing to them at the same time.
Right. Now, I do recommend not doing this in your yard. Remove that element of this is my yard. This is where I have fun. This is where I run and play. This is where I poop and pee. Get them away from that area. Maybe you have a big yard and you get them away from the area where they mainly do it, but regardless, get them out of their comfort zone per se. And if they still won't engage in the line, there's a couple of tricks you can do. One of them is a liver drag. Another is a hide drag. That's a lot of scent. You want to get away from that pretty quick if you have to do that. Another trick that we use is kind of a little bit to Ethan's point, but take a piece of kibble, or I like to use hot dogs, cut up small pieces of hot dogs. Every step that you take, put a piece of hot dog in that step. And then the next day, every other step, put a piece of hot dog. The next day, space it out. Then eventually maybe it'll just be at a 90. We don't have to do that very often, but there are dogs where we have to use those tactics to get them going. And if we have to use any of those tactics, we get away from it just as quick as we can.
Sure. Kenny, you wanted, before we move into the next piece, you want to grab some of these comments?
Sure.
Question.
Sure. Put them up there. We'll tackle them.
I don't want. What's that?
Put them up there. We'll tackle them.
Yeah, I just don't want to get overwhelmed with them as we get into it. So let's just get like we did last time. A lot of early greetings. Hi, Frank. Hi, Calvin. Hi, John. Vicky.
Hey, Calvin. I did get your text. I've been swamped today, but I am going to get back to you.
There you go, Calvin. Let's see what. Let's look at Dustin here. Ethan trained my dog, and he was terrified of the woods for what seemed like 2 to 3 weeks. Also afraid of deer scent. Do you remember that one, Ethan? Dustin King's dog?
Yeah, she was odd. There was one where, like, I tell folks, like, man, I'll call you if I don't think your dog has it after a couple weeks, and you can, we can decide what to do from there. And I remember it's like, the first time we take a dog to the woods, anything goes. Who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, we had like the third or fourth time we'd try to track, like she would just like her hair would stand up. She would get behind me and alert bark. And it's like the second she like would get a whiff of either hooves or liver, she would just get fired up on full alert. She's like, Uncle Ethan, you're taking me out to the woods to kill me just like you did this deer. I know it. And I'm like, I'm not gonna kill you. And it was a slow process, but in a lot of other ways, she was similar, like walking across expanded metal. She was kind of nervous about like climbing over things, just anything that's kind of not natural to her. I guess environmental exposure up to that point would put her on high alert. And you know what, we got through it and it was fine. And she piled up some deer this year. She did well. But yeah, she was straight up she is a Catahoula.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But no, she was a cool dog, but she was funny. Just real weird the first few times. I mean, like legitimately high alert, taking her to the woods is something.
Those are the challenging ones.
Yep. Nicole Sherwood says, talking about the e-collars, Finley wore his e-collar for about a week before I started using it, just so he could get used to wearing it since he's a pansy.
Yeah, man.
I met Finley, Nicole. He's a sweet boy.
Yeah, I have like a Filson game bag, and I have an e-collar or a tracking collar in it. I have an e-collar in it, just a regular belt collar in it all the time. And I'll just be out walking dogs and just be like, hey, sit, and then put an e-collar on them and then take it off, or put it on, walk around, take it off. Just, they get so much reps of putting stuff on and taking it off, all kinds of gear, because that stuff will throw dogs off. Dustin just mentioned, getting them used to that. Or Dustin just mentioned his dog, but he got a new gunner kennel a couple weeks ago. And I think what we came up with is jumped in it. She had her.
Oh, got a connection issue.
Well, yeah. she hit it, and like that antenna on her tracking collar probably spooked her out, and then she was just right off the bat kind of nervous about getting in the gunner kennel for a while. Had to work through getting her to jump in the $800 kennel as opposed to the $20 Walmart one that she'd been plowing into for a year or two.
Goes back to that acclimation to all things. And Ethan, full disclosure, your internet glitched, so we lost about 10 seconds of what you said. So Kenny, could you please send him the link to Starlink's website? I'm just kidding.
It's funny because I'm on Starlink.
You are?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'll reserve comment. Let's just grab Nicole again. I start on one again, talking about e-collar. I start on one and work up every time. I use the e-collar because sometimes Finley is a 6 and other times he's a 30. There you go. Depending on the stim level or the stimulation level of the dog and what he's engaged with in the environment and all of that. So
here's the problem. There is a problem with that.
Okay. Let me not bypass it so quickly then.
So if you get into a situation where you need to correct that dog in a state of emergency, you don't have time to start at 1 and work your way up. You need to establish that baseline And if it's somewhere between 6th and 30, then maybe you need to put it somewhere between 6 and 30 in the event that you need to use that correction in an emergency state.
So
Yeah.
Two things. One, I always have like my emergency stimulation level where I can scroll to it real quick on my training commands. At least on my handheld, I can set it up to where, like, I have my normal line. It sounds pretty identical to yours, Kenny, but I can pop that button down twice and be on like a 10 or something if we're like close to highways or, you know, evil adjacent landowners or whatever. But another thing is with perpetually climbing, depending on your purpose for using the stimulation, you can also desensitize a dog to that stimulation and could be inadvertently training them to be dismissive of that stimulation on there. Like if you're constantly starting from understimulated and climbing to it, you can be, giving bad reps of, whatever you're trying to do.
Correct.
Yeah. Terry Foles says, what kind of tracking shoes do you guys use?
Okay, so I have buck braids, Waskow, and I used to have a pair of the ones you were talking about where the hoofs mount on the back. What I no longer have are the ones where the hooves mount on the back. I don't do well walking in high heels.
Yeah, I've heard somebody else describe it. I've never used them.
So honestly, my preference is the Waskow. They're comfortable. They're light. Great customer service from Darren. If you do have an issue, he's on top of things. They're affordable and they're readily available. And
that's what I use. And I've gotten a few pair from him now, and it's always like a message, and then a couple days later, I have shoes at my door.
Yeah, that's right. And Terry, I use Waskows as well. That's the only shoe I've ever used, so I can't have anything to compare them to. But that's what I use too, and I got it for the same reason. It boiled down to they're more affordable, and just like you, Ethan, and I've talked about this before on my podcast. From the time I first made contact with Darren, my shoes were paid for within 15 minutes on the outer perimeter. Yeah, there they are. There's the Waskows. Brand new shiny set, Kenny.
Yep, just got them in.
I've been thinking about ordering another pair just to have in case, I trip and fall and there's damage one or something. But I've had several from Dylan just sent me a picture just now. He just got his today. How do you walk in these things? He just literally
you just roll your ankle.
Yeah, it doesn't take long. You get used to them.
Yeah,
I will say we do use the buck braids a lot.
Yeah.
Well, John does. I don't really use them that often. John does. But a lot of it also in the terrain you're in. We like to mix things up. We'll do some with the Waskow, some with the buck braids, but my personal favorite is the Waskow. And you to get those, just contact Darren Miner.
Yep, I promise you, he will respond very quickly. So if you send him a message in Messenger or whatever means. Let's do a couple more here. Joe Tenney, I like to put some blood on the food and use it to lay a trail to practice as a pup. Going back to what do you do to engage your dog on the line?
That's all you, buddy.
That's all you, buddy.
Yeah, I just hate messing with blood.
Me too.
Yeah, messing is the right word. Let's do John Melton's, and then we'll get back into it, and we'll pick up with Ryan Davis here in a little bit. John Melton, hi John. What do you do if you make a circle where the line crosses over and the dog starts to run that circle backwards? If that makes sense, he's asking.
I let them run it and see if they work it out. And most of the time, they're going to work it out and they're going to turn around and come right back.
Yeah, I was going to say something identical. I mean, just from the standpoint of, I definitely don't want to give conflicting information of, hey, don't follow that scent. Just to err in how I laid the track and they jump it.
Yep, he needs a link.
Yeah, he needs a link, or he needs to redirect. You need to redirect your receiver. Ethan throws up again. Is it really cloudy there? Yeah, strain. No, that's okay, man.
Yeah. So I will say this: when we're talking about starting them early on that first thing, we're not walking them across the line in the middle of the track. You know, we're walking them across at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay.
So hopefully that answers the question. We'll get into a little more details on that.
Yeah. So let's get back into it. We kind of left off with acclimating or what do you do to help your dog engage the line if it doesn't seem to want to take it. If I remember, that's where we left off. So we've now got the dog engaging with the line. Now what?
Okay, so I'm going to speak for myself, but I'm pretty aggressive in my moves. On average, we can take a dog from day one to 24-hour-old trails at roughly a half mile in about 2.5 weeks. And I'm not saying that the average person can do that, but in most cases, people do not push their dogs hard enough. And when I say push them, I don't mean literally pushing them. I mean advancing them fast enough.
Challenging them.
Correct. So
progressing them quick. Yeah.
When I made that post this morning about success through failure or whatever, however I word, I can't remember.
Yeah, I'll find it.
Had a lot going on. You've got to challenge the dog. And if every line is a slam dunk, easy from point A to point B, you are not getting full benefit from that training, and neither is the dog. You agree, Ethan?
100%. You see people talk about like burning their dogs out a lot, but in between having a full season on your belt and going back to training tracks, you see some boredom sometimes or just like disengagement. But in starting a dog, man, I might see that once and it's the same thing. I'm just going to leash him up. We're going to come back tomorrow, but we get to rolling. I mean, we had the set of handler visits on our second week of dogs this last round, and we were running 24-hour tracks. At the end of the first week, they were running 700-800 yard tracks that were 10 hours old. I mean, they're capable of quite a bit. As far as the most of the line, I guess their nose and just ability to follow it. Once you've established that, hey, engage with this, it's worth your while. It's well within their abilities. You just gotta generalize it to all kinds of things. And how I do that is we get them following that first 90, and then I'm putting a scent challenge in the middle of it, and then I'm putting some vegetation disturbance in the middle of it, and I'm putting a grid search. I'm putting a gap, and we just build on essentially the challenges you see in the ABTA guide, plus scent pools, and those get bigger every time, and we just add age to it and try and add some environmental complexity. But it happens pretty quick. We just pick a thing, and maybe this week what we're isolating and our kind of shorter.
Well, let me cut you off there. You're getting ahead of the game. You're getting ahead of the game a little bit.
Gosh, Ethan, save a little for the rest of us, will you, buddy? Jeez.
Okay. Okay. So I want to add on that. So what I do is, let's say that our first track is 100 yards at an hour old. The next track I'm going to add. I'm going to change one element.
Sure.
So it may be 200 yards at an hour old. Then the next one may be 200 yards at 2 hours old. And then the next one after that, I'll add in a 90 and keep it at 200 yards at 2 hours old. And if they get through that, and I'm not saying it has to be pretty and picture perfect, if they can get from point A to point B reasonably with minimal challenge, then I'm going to double the age again. And I keep doing it. Once I get to about 800 yards, it's just doubling time. I don't so much go past that a whole lot. So if you're looking for how do I progress, just double one thing at a time. And because you can always back up if the dog struggles and doesn't make it to the end, you can always back up a little bit. So if you go from 4 hours to 8 hours and you're seeing some issues there, cut it back to 6 hours in the next one.
Right. Yeah. Let the dog dictate the progress pace to a point.
Correct.
And by changing one factor at a time, I mean, we talk about it all the time, so. Okay. Kenny, just for the listeners, the post says, do you understand how failure in your training can pave the way for success? That's how you put it. And that's right. Because that was born out of a conversation we had in our 4-hour meeting that, that last hour was talking about a lot of great stuff. And we had the discussion about, failure. And we started talking about, well, how do you interpret failure? What does failure mean? And for me, everything we talked about, none of it was failure. That's not failing. That's learning and getting better. But, I would have early on, and this is for new handlers, and I'm moderately experienced. I'll put it that way. But when I was green as a green tomato, I've talked about it here before. So, you want to see that red line laid right over top of that blue line on your dog tracks and without any glitches, because that's how we want the dog to track the deer. But that is not developing the dog.
No.
That means that line was too easy and the dog just followed it to the prize and didn't have to develop his problem-solving skills that are inherently there, but if you don't use them, they can't develop. He can't figure, so I have quickly, no, it wasn't quickly. I am now to the point where I want to see it look a little more like a bowl full of spaghetti at times. I want to see him take the line, but I want to see him circle at a turn. I want to see some systematic problem solving on a line.
Yeah, you want to impress me? Put a line like that out there on a post and say, "Hey, look at this." What? Yeah, and maybe you don't know what happened, but put that out there. Say, "Hey, this is what happened." I'm not impressed by a dog that runs it flawless. I mean, to a degree. Let me rephrase that. If it's a young dog like a Bavarian I just acquired. I mean, the first track we trained this dog 2 years ago, but it really hasn't done anything since then. So we ran it on a line that was 25 hours old, and it was on a string the whole way. So yeah, I was pretty proud of that. But
sure,
you can believe the next one didn't look like that.
Yeah, but now that, okay, this is where this dog's at. I got to build some more challenges in for the dog to work through.
Right, which is going to lead into some of the stuff that Ethan was talking about. So let's talk. I want to touch on 90s a little bit because I've gotten a slew of phone calls this week for people asking for training advice. And a lot of those were, what do I do at a 90? Or some of them, they didn't mean to, but they created an issue at a 90. And what they were doing is they would get to the 90, their dog would overshoot it, and they would just stop. They would hold on to that 30-foot lead and they'd give them 30 feet to work it out. Well, one person, and I'm not going to mention any names, one person in particular ended up teaching that dog that when it hits the end of that lead rope and it feels that tension and the handler's not moving, they come back and look to the handler to show them the way. And it was created through stopping at that 90 and then coming back and the handler saying, okay, it's this way. So my advice there is walk past that 90, let the dog overshoot it. Even if it doesn't find its way back, don't bring it back to that 90, bring it back 30, 40 yards past that 90 or, prior to the 90, where it was already tracking, let it run it again. If it goes past again, do the same thing. Don't give it to it.
Yeah, and we had that discussion last night in our meeting, and that was a great moment for me, kind of a eureka moment, because I was the stand there and give your dog 30-foot guy, not thinking about it the way you did. So yes, go with your dog, and I don't know if it was necessarily always off 90s. I just don't remember. Probably was, but yeah, what a great thing. Will it condition a dog every time to do what the scenario you described? Not necessarily, but it could. And why invite the opportunity when you don't have to?
Right. So, and that goes back into what Ethan started to touch on. If you see that as an issue, Ethan, what would you do at that point on your next training lines?
So if I see what as an issue?
If you see an issue such as 90-degree turns, if they're just blowing through them and you just keep circling back, you don't give it to them. You keep circling back and they're just not making that turn, or eventually they do, but you've identified that they are struggling with the 90-degree turn. At that point, what do you do as far as isolating the problem? What is your next training steps?
Yeah, you mentioned the word isolation. I'm gonna trim all the fat off that I can. One thing I like to do for specifically setting the pace of like we're gonna be off odor and you got to reacquire it is I start dogs after the first couple of tracks. I start them at 90s or at like 50-degree angles from it. So like, I'm giving them a, hey, check here, find it, search, whatever your formal search command is. They're hitting odor and immediately pointed the wrong direction, and you can kind of right away create this. There's odor, now you're off of it. What's your reacquisition behavior? But yeah, I'm gonna trim the fat. Start presenting that at the very beginning of it. I'm gonna have another 90, and I might beef up the engagement around that 90 in some manner. Maybe that's like I might get a little wild with vegetation disturbance and like the kind of how intense I'm doing my footsteps there. I might put a little goodie right at the 90, a little something extra to say like check over here, like to lure them in there. Yeah. And we're gonna isolate it and get rid of all the, I guess, time wasters of like just following lines, because most dogs, if they can follow like a 200-yard line, they can follow like a 10 gazillion yard line.
So in other words, you're going to work on short trails with 90s.
Yeah, 90% of what we do out here from start to sending a dog home is 300 yards and under. And we achieve 24 plus hours, 1,000-yard, multiple turns, grids, so all that stuff. But most of that work is actually done that's really short distance wise.
More drill type. Yep.
Yeah. Right. So what we like to do is just like he talked about. I don't lay a line with a 90, a grid search, a scent challenge, a scent gap all at once. We build on that. So if my first one is a 90 and they struggle on that 90, we're doing isolation drills of just 90s until they just smokes them. And I'm talking left-hand turns and right-hand turns. And once it finally, if it's smoking those, and it doesn't take long, because if we're running 200 or 300-yard isolation drills of 90s, I can run 4 or 5 of those in place of one long trail, and you're getting a lot more. So typically in one day, you have that down, maybe 2.
Yep.
Well, then you have that down. Well, now you add in that next challenge of a scent pool. Well, if they start struggling there, well, guess what? We isolate that, and that's what we're working on the next 4 or 5 short isolation trails. Do the same thing with terrain challenges.
Yep.
Road crossings is a big one. You come to a road and a dog, they typically want to go left or right, or check both ways before they go straight across. But maybe you have a dog that always wants to go straight across. You need to work on every turn within that terrain challenge. And if they're having issues with that, guess what? That next day or the next couple of days, that's what we are focusing on. Whatever that challenge. Water. rock, mud, fields, woods, briars. Briars is a big one. And so many times you see people just wanting to throw the dog into the briars or drag the dog into the briars. I've had to do that sometimes, but what's great is if you have a dog that, they have something that they want, whether it's a treat, a toy, throw it into the briars. They want to go get it.
Yep.
That's the best way.
Sling foam bumpers, deer hooves, kibble, whatever, and just like go bust in there after something that's the high value to them, and they'll get pretty good at it. But yeah, I've totally seen dogs that, if you never really get into thick stuff, and then the first time they do, they're like, yeah, it's not for me. I'm just gonna, look for a way around or just give up.
My dog will go around it now. I mean,
I don't blame her.
But I don't either. And I have zero problem with it because she's like, okay, it went through here. I don't want to go through there. I'm just going to walk around and reacquire. I don't care. She does it. I'm not going to force her through briars. Hell, I don't want to go through them. Well, if we can, Kenny, let me. And I think you want to say something to that. Do you want to comment on that?
Go ahead.
Oh, let me. You better not be a bloodhound comment. Take a drink of whatever goofy juice you're drinking.
Coffee.
Oh, okay. Good call. Let me go back to the 90s. So getting the dog to, if they keep missing a 90, how do you guys feel about double laying the hoof scent, double or triple laying the hoof scent at the 90 and putting more deer scent down? Do you think there's anything to that? Have you guys employed that?
Yeah,
Have you seen that technique before?
Yeah. Yep. So we had a dog brought to us from Ohio, and this dog's found a bunch of deer. But the individual says, "Hey, I just feel like my dog is missing some deer." And we're like, "Okay." He drove down from Ohio. We laid a line, and let me rephrase that. I laid the line. John went to run the dog, and John was running it blind. The dog blew past the first 90. John calls me. He's like, "Hey, can you come pick me up? I'm at the highway." I said, "The highway?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "John, you couldn't read when that dog got off the line?" "No, the dog didn't get off. You came to the highway, right?" I said, "No." This dog showed zero sign of getting, it nose down, tail up.
Those are the tough dogs. It all looks good.
It was a bloodhound, wasn't it?
It was a bloodhound.
Yeah,
everything
I know.
Looks like good trailing behavior.
It was a bloodhound.
I've been there. It's a freaking thing.
We started working on isolation drills, and this dog would just blow through them. And I don't know what it was following. I have no clue. I think it was just like some kind of robot that just nose down, tail up, and it just went.
It was having a time of its life, whatever the hell it was following.
Yeah.
They're hardwired. They're hardwired to be pumped up about sniffing things.
So with that particular dog, the thing that we found that worked great is we took a piece of hide and then at the 90, we just rubbed it and added more scent. Okay. So when it got to that, it just stopped. Like, whoa, what happened here? Well, then when it went past, like, okay, that went away. I'm coming back, and then it learned to make that turn, and so what we did is we started moving that where we were rubbing it. So instead of doing it right at the 90, the next trail we did it 5 yards down the line, and it could smell that because it was a stronger scent. And eventually we eliminated it, and that's how we worked that dog through it. Each dog's different, but that was one tactic that we used.
Yep. Cool. Okay. You want to do some questions? Good natural breaking point.
Yeah. Ethan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's to a T what I've done. I've never done it with necessarily, like just increasing the distance past the 90, but we've tried to make it apparent that, like, as crystal as clear as we can, that like you're off odor now, in the most obnoxious way possible, and that's usually ramping it up going into it and being pretty heavy with it on the 90 right there. I'll also add some leash pressure as we go, just because if I can give clear communication, like, all right, you're not just going to go for a stroll and I'm going to allow it. But like you said, that's just, we're nudging them back to try again and nudging them back. We're not saying right here it is the answer to the test that I'm going to reward you for not doing a good job. But
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I do want to add, every dog is different.
Yeah. I can relate to that being at the road, Kenny. I've told this story before. Our second year, I was following my dog because, by God, you got to trust your dog. And 400 yards later, I get to the road. I'm like, man, something's not right. The hunter comes on the radio. Hey, Matt, we're at the deer. I was so damn mad I couldn't see straight. Deer turned left. Dog kept going, then turned right. She just missed a turn, but we were within 20 yards of it. So, yeah,
it happens.
It happens.
If it hasn't happened to you, you haven't been tracking long enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's one we'll talk about. Ryan Davis says, I guess I got lucky with my bloodhounds, used only hooves and Wascow shoes, and they took right to it. But I love all the info I'm getting here. So thank you for the shout out. But you didn't get lucky at all, Ryan. And I'll take this one, Kenny. You didn't get lucky at all.
Oh,
you were using a superior tracking breed and a bloodhound. So Kenny, would you like to comment on that?
You want another one, Matt?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll comment on that. Honestly, about 90% of the dogs take the hoof only from the rip.
Sure. Yep.
It's just most people don't try it.
Yeah. Yep. I didn't. I will tell you. I've said this before too. In talking about training, is I really didn't understand how much scent was on a hide, and I dragged the hide, and of course couldn't see anything. And when my dog was 10 or 12 weeks old, I'm like, my God, there's nothing here, not realizing I'm leaving this freaking massive plume of good smelling stuff that was probably overwhelming to a puppy that age whose brain isn't capable of processing that much scent. Yep. Different world now. Frank Rotundi, my buddy Frank. I got to read it over here. We are heading into our second season. My pup just turned a year old. He's got a Teckle. My goals for this season is learning to read my dog of when she is on or off the line and line discipline. How far do I let her off the line so I can work on the read by trying to hold her to the line discipline? Should I work on both simultaneously? And that's a popular question. I had another friend of mine, ask me the same thing this weekend. So I've seen a similar question multiple times.
So I see one problem there, and it's a common problem that most people make is steering the dog. When you start talking about holding the dog to line discipline, you're talking about steering the dog. You don't want to steer the dog. And I don't know if you understand what I'm saying by steering the dog. You don't want to force the dog to go a certain direction. The dog needs to do that on their own.
Yeah.
I'll also refer to as joysticking the dog.
Yeah, joysticking. Yeah, my priority is like sustained engagement with the task, and they seem to 99% of the time tighten themselves up. In my experience, trying to, like you said, trying to joystick just creates in my mind too many opportunities for conflict with what you want them to do and what they're trying to understand that you want them to do. I will say, let's see, learning to read when they're off or on the line, something I like to do. One of my little 90 drills, I flag a whole lot of stuff just for easy, quick observation, and I try and play the dumb handler that doesn't know where it's going to them. But I call them no shoe 90s, but like I'll make a 90 and like I'll just drop my shoes right where I'm about to start the 90, and I'll just go like blast away on vegetation, and I'm sure there's still some residual, chemical pheromones on me in some manner, but I just blast another 100 yards with no deer odor, and then come back and put my shoes on and take a 90 to intentionally suck them out of that, just for that observation's sake, and try and like slowly start developing a thinking dog. On top of that, I do some other just odor segregation with, my scent, vegetation disturbance, or crust vegetation, disturbed earth, and I'll straight up initiate searches where there is nothing done in the environment, as well as I'll initiate searches where I've gone out there with no wounded game scent and just beat up I call them lollipops, but I'll take off down a line and just like make a mess in the middle and come back out. And I'll say, hey, find it right here. And they'll track it the first few times. They're like, oh, yes. And then over time, there's no reinforcement to that. There's no reward at the end. And I'm just introducing them to like, vegetation disturbance. All that stuff is on this, and that's fine to follow it, but follow it only if, our target odor's there. But that's something you can start doing. I call them blanks, and just taking them out there where there's not a track and saying, find it, and observing. And eventually you can, to me, they get pretty crispy with refusing to track when they're off odor most of the time.
I think another key element to add into your training, and this is something I've gotten several phone calls this week about, is scent gaps. A scent gap is a great tool for training, because what happens when that dog hits that gap? All of a sudden, the scent's gone. Well, the dog will go into search mode, or should go into search mode, and try to pick it up. Now, it may blow right through it if it's too fresh of a track. So when you start working scent gaps, you want them older than 12-hour-old trails, because you want to eliminate that disturbed earth and broken vegetation.
Human scent as much as you can.
Yes. So that is probably the easiest tool to learn how to read when your dog gets off the line, or you're going to see it go into search mode. Another great way to do that, to see when the dog reattaches itself to the line, is through what I call control searches. So you walk a line out. Well, you intentionally start the dog 40 yards off, and you give that command, and you cross that line, and then you'll see the head snap.
Yeah.
So you'll know when it reacquires. So that's another key thing.
Yeah. So part of his question, because I'm curious how you would respond to this when the dog is off, whether it misses a 90 or gets off on a goose chase for some reason, and it as a handler because you laid the line. How far do you recommend letting the dog go before you bring it back and help it to reacquire the line, assuming it's not showing any problem solving techniques or effort?
Well, you just answered it right there. As long as it's attempting to solve the problem and trying to find the scent and reacquire the line, I let them work.
Yes.
And I don't care. There's not a distance. I mean, they may go 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 yards. I've seen a dog go 50 yards and turn around and work it out. As long as they are actively working to attempt to reacquire that line, I let them work. If they continue to just keep going off on a goose chase,
and they get to the highway.
Right. I mean, I don't set a distance because, like I said, it's all
more of a feel. All right, man.
Right. Now, if I had to set a distance, and I got to remember that the average person hasn't handled as many dogs or trained as many dogs as we have. So if I set a distance, I'd probably say 30, 40 yards would be a good starting point.
Yeah, I'll say that's something that surprises a lot of folks is when they come watch me work with their dog, is how far the range is sometimes when they engage with these things and them still be on task. And I think that's, where a lot of joysticking comes from, is we haven't really found the boundaries of where our dog will work out something and, where their actual, I guess, disengage point is. And we get in the way of their problem solving. And, if we got a hold to that lead, it's so easy to give them a yank or something. And then, how clear is that communication to them? Are we accidentally saying like, stop doing this thing that I told you to do? But yeah, I'm making darn sure before I stop them that they're not engaged with the task really. Other than that, I let them rip, and it can be a pretty good range depending on the dog. Most are pretty tight, but
yeah.
Now, I will say, looking at his dog, he has a teckle, so that is going. I would say that range is going to be less than a longer-legged dog.
Just
sure.
Yeah. I get it.
And I'm gonna tell you, most teckles, they get 10 feet off of it, and they're panicked to get back. I've trained a bunch of them, and
yeah. Nicole's got a long one here. Let's see what she says. Vibrators. Going back to what we talked about, the progressive increased up to 30. Vibrators are emergency. He freaks out and runs back to so quick it's not even funny. And the e-collar stim is really just reinforcing commands. He's 100% off leash, off e-collar trained. It's just an attention grabber if I really need it. It's a attention grabber if I really need it. When I introduced it, our trainer told me to always work up to the level we needed, but learning this new info, I'll run it in between is average from now on. I apologize about my inability to read at a third grade level.
And I'll say this, the trainer probably didn't mean it the way that it was interpreted.
Yeah, could be.
That happens a lot. I hear that a lot. And they were probably giving the advice that we did, is work your way up until you find that point. But when someone comes and picks a dog up from us and they do want us to collar condition it, I let them know where that baseline is. And a lot of times they have to increase it when they get home because the dog doesn't respect them yet.
Yeah. Going back to tracking shoes, Lindsay says, what tracking shoes do you recommend for hiking in the mountains?
A good pair of tall lace-up boots and some tracking sticks.
Some tracking sticks. There you know what? This is a serious question, Lindsay. I heard on your podcast with Matt, you're going to be in Missouri. I'm going to be in Missouri too. I'd love to chat with you, meet you. Maybe we do some kind of joint venture at some point. Maybe there, but we certainly want to have you on. But I'm curious, for those folks that are tracking elk and tracking other things, how are you training for that? We deer trackers are using tracking hooves, and maybe it's the same. I'm just curious. I got thinking about that.
It's 100% the same.
Just deer hooves and go. Yep. Because it's a pheromone that we've talked about.
Yeah.
In the last
exactly the same. I've tracked many different species, including elk. Now, granted, I'm not tracking Colorado elk. I'm tracking in high fence, but it's the same. The scent is the same. I have trained. I'm not going to give away one of my secrets, but I have trained with elk hooves. But at the end of the day, it's the same training.
Yeah.
Now, to answer her question, what tracking shoes do you recommend for hiking in the mountains? None of them are fun in the mountains. I'm still going to take the Wascows. They're awkward. Here's why. You start getting into rock and you have buck braids, the traction isn't quite as good as it is the rubber.
Yeah. I would tell you, I have a good little hillside out back here. I laid a line on walking across the side of this hill. I couldn't. I can't imagine mountains, Lindsay, even in Wascows. But I would opt for the Wascows too.
You have to have good ankle support. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. You can.
Yeah. Just a care note for the Wascows: don't leave them outside or in the bed of your truck to bolt rust, and they're plastic inserts. Yeah, you got to take care of them. They're not bulletproof, that's for sure. And we
did do a live stream with Darren Miner. If you want to go back and search it, it's there.
Yep.
And he explains everything, the ins and outs, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yep.
She said she said her ankle still hurts. She has buck braids. And like I said, we do have buck braids as well as the Wascow. And I will tell you, I have laid lines in the mountains, and it's not fun. A good solid pair of tall leather, heavy leather, lace up boots and Wascows.
All right, just because we just talked about scent gap, there are a couple scent gap.
Ethan needs to send him a link.
What's that?
We need to send him a link. He needs some Starlink.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Sorry, guys. Now my Starlink's being a jerk. Okay. So here we go. A couple of scent gaps. John Melton. What is your technique for? Yep. What is your technique for laying a scent gap for the distance and the distance of the gap?
Go ahead and put them all up there, and because they're all going to tie into one, if you don't mind. We'll just cover them all, and then we'll answer them all.
Frankly, I don't know how to put them all up there. Maybe
no, just one at a time. We got John Melton's the how to lay them.
Oh yeah. I got you. Where was Terry's? Terry had one. There you go. Terry says, "How big is the scent gap?"
And one right above it, Michael Pritz.
Yep. Michael Pitt says, "Is there a real natural scent gap, or is it for handlers?" And I want to talk about that one. So go ahead.
Okay. So as far as how big the scent gap is, it's up to you. I will say I like them to be a little wider than narrower. I would say at least 50, 60 yards. A lot of dogs blow right through it if you go any less than that. Now, how do you lay them? It depends on what you're using. If you're using shoes or sticks, but basically when we're using shoes, we will take the shoes off, and we will walk another 50, 60 yards, put the shoes back on, and continue on the line. Now, what is the benefit of it? The benefit of it, you can learn to read your dog when it goes into that search mode pretty easily. The other side of that is, you can also watch how your dog works when it loses that. And you also build that relationship where sometimes your dog needs your help, and you need to know how to help work the dog through scenarios like that. But in order to get that side of it, you need to do one of two things. You need to have someone else lay the line, or you lay the line during the day and run it at night, or lay it at night and run it during the day, because everything looks different. So that's two ways of doing it. But again, it needs to be an older trail so that the other scent has time to dissipate. Now, do you want to add anything to what I just said, Ethan?
Yeah. The technique is to actually make it a gap is with just age. You want to get past the vegetation disturbance. If I'm bordering the age, I'll take the shoes off, backtrack a little way, and make like just a big loop around. And you can kind of tell if they're engaging with that. But usually
that's typically what I do as well.
Yeah, most of the scent gap stuff I do is not happening until we're already past the overnight tracks basically.
Right.
And then they won't engage with any vegetation disturbance hardly after that.
So now to answer Michael Pritz, and this is something I actually received several phone calls about this, but one today. Is there real natural scent gap, or is it for the handlers? There is 100% real natural scent gaps out there. One example is a heavy flowing creek or river. And I say heavy flowing because that scent gets washed down pretty quick. But you do have scenarios and certain terrain. I can lay a track for you right now down the road from my house. 9 out of 10 dogs cannot work through this area, and we don't even lay a scent gap. We just continue laying the line right through this one particular area, and 9 out of 10 dogs lose it. I don't know what it is. But it is a struggle. It's like, I don't know, like aliens just come down and suck the scent up from that area. We've laid some test lines in there, but it does happen. Well, here's another example. I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but you're tracking along, and all of a sudden you come up to a field where the farmer's out there running a plow.
Yeah.
And it happens. Jeff Still on a test line. I laid a test line for him. It was in Louisiana, his started level test. I laid the line, come back 2 hours later, and a bulldozer was literally bulldozing his line. He worked through it. Red. What's that?
So that would make you see red.
Yeah, let me tell you, they worked right through it. Like, I mean, that's a high level dog and high level handler. And if that wasn't bad enough, he went to run his season test, and Jason Bell was his judge. Guess what happened? The bulldozer showed up on that line.
Well, I run into a fair amount of plowed field, not necessarily after the deer cross the field, but after the beans or the corns or whatever's been harvested, and they go and do a fall till. I had 2 or 3 of those this year, and the dog slows down, but she works her tail off, and she can do it, but it's slow and methodical. A lot of double checking. So yeah, it's important.
Yeah, so there's definitely natural scent gaps, but from a training aspect, it's more about problem solving for the dog as well as you, and the ability to read that dog when it goes into that search mode.
Okay. I want to ask one question because I've seen this come up, and if you want to defer to another, later on or whatever, but we're talking about scent gaps and stuff, and in terrain, the impact that terrain can have on scent. Do either of you know how would you respond to chlorophyll? I've heard, and I'm sincerely asking this question, the early spring when there's so much chlorophyll in the vegetation when it's greening up, it just makes it so hard for a dog. Is that a thing? And if so, why? Is that chlorophyll just overpowering it? Is it eroding the scent, like chemical erosion? Well, how would you guys respond to that?
Is this a bloodhound?
No. My bloodhound never has
a problem with you.
Chlorophyll. In fact, I look for chlorophyll. No, I'm just kidding.
Chloroform or chlorophyll?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, we gotta have a little fun.
Of course.
So I have seen it impact, but I've also seen it impact in ways that you wouldn't expect. For instance, I took some dogs to run UBT test in Louisiana, pretty much right at the Texas line, and our judge was Brant Green, and he went through this one area with like just really tall, thick, fresh green vegetation and I mean, I could see he went through there. I mean, it was obvious, but I wasn't going to steer the dog.
Yeah.
And he in fact made the comment, well, this section ought to be easy for the dog, and this dog was just smoking it on the short stuff, and we had like 25-mile-an-hour winds, at least like 20 sustained, probably gust of 30, and we were going through a cow field that was pretty short, and then we hit this tall vegetation. He's like, yeah, the dog ought to do really good through this, and it got in there and just struggled. And you would think with that taller, new green growth, that it would have just smoked it. The scent would have held in there, and it didn't. It struggled. And
Kenny, you may know about this. My understanding is a lot of that vegetation disturbance, I mean, it creates like irritants to the dogs, right?
It can. But here's the other side of it, and I talked about this last week, is it creates a lot of scent and pheromones and bacteria as you crush that vegetation. And so I wonder if it's more of like and I don't have a solid answer, but my theory is it's more of a sensory overload, and now
that's what I was wondering.
The scent from the vegetation has overpowered the odors of the deer trail.
Sure. I mean, just think about your lawn after you've mowed it, and the fact then go to a dog that their nose is 5,000 to 100,000 times better, depending on which study you're reading. But
whether it's a bloodhound or anything else, I get it.
I wouldn't say better. No. No, but that's my theory behind it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to claim to be a scientist, but that is.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because I had an old long time bird dog guy. When I was running some practice lines up at my campground in the late spring, early summer, and he started talking about the chlorophyll, and I don't know if I've necessarily experienced it. Dylan just texted me and talking about he saw someone that went into a clover field. I've heard people say they hate clover. And they attribute it to chlorophyll. I've always wondered, why? What does chlorophyll do? And maybe it's not the chlorophyll as much it is what you said. It's just it acts as a nose jammer. With the broken vegetation and very very pungent. I don't know. I just thought it was. Go ahead, Ethan.
I apologize, man. Kenny, how old was that line you ran where the dense vegetation caused kind of a struggle area?
It was about 9 hours old, but it laid overnight with a lot of moisture.
I got you. Do you think so? Something me and some of my folks were talking about the other day is like just in terms of a grid search, just like outweighting the vegetation disturbance aspect of it. But I mean, do you think y'all would have struggled as much if it was 24 hours old on that?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Because I know in training, when I try and set up any kind of vegetation disturbance related challenges, if it sits overnight or more than 10 or 12 hours, it's like it just was a waste of time to go out there and do it. I've got to keep those like 8 hours and under, it seems.
Oh yeah, in this particular scenario, it was spring, and there was a lot of moisture, which is going to hold that scent. And with it being overnight and a lot of moisture and the amount of vegetation blocking that wind, I believe it just held it. It was a high moisture area, so and the vegetation was taller there because there was more moisture in the soil than the rest of the cow field, which again holds more scent longer. Yeah. So I think it was just a sensory overload is what my explanation was. We worked through it. Don't get me wrong. We worked through it, but the dog was actually jumping and trying to get it. It was a tackle. It was jumping, like trying to get its nose out of the vegetation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
So, what's next? You guys in the series, you want to continue with questions, or do you want to continue with your outline?
I say we go with the questions because I feel like, well, one thing I want to touch on is the reward at the end of the track. I know there's some questions there on that, and I will say that 9 out of 10 times, or probably 99% of the time, it's praise. That's all we do is praise. Some dogs are food driven, but we don't use a lot of treats. It's praise. I did have a dog that wanted water at the end of the trail. That was that dog's thing. It wanted water.
I apologize. I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, let's walk down this the series of questions and statements, Kenny. And I want to hit Nicole again. Just because I have a comment on it, but I'll let you take it. We are an on-lead state only, but I have been running practice tracks off-lead, and it's amazing to watch the dog work without the dope on the rope behind him. Finley is a whole new dog on lead now because of practicing off-lead sometimes. And that's the part that I thought was interesting. And when you're done, I want to comment on off-lead versus off-lead a little bit as my recent experience with it. But I'm curious as to your thoughts, particularly in that last sentence, Kenny.
Well, one thing I encourage everyone to do is train your dog and quote unquote finish your dog on lead. Of course, a dog is never really finished.
Yeah.
But when you reach that point, where you're consistently, able to trail 24 hours old, and you're able to work through those challenges, those problems. And, you know, another good kind of place to way to establish if you met there is like our finish level test. If your dog can do that consistently, you know, then or even the season level test, then if you want to work off lead, I recommend it, even if you're in an on lead state. And I'll tell you why. You really get to see how your dog wants to work naturally, and then you see how much you are holding that dog back or joysticking, steering.
The point I was going to make. Yep. And in Nicole, the word I use to describe on lead versus off lead when you're ready to do it, when the dog is ready to do it, is liberating. Absolutely liberating for multiple of reasons. But Kenny, you just nailed it. And that was the point I was going to say. And that ties back into, you know, kind of Frank's question of, you know, how far do I let him go? You know, reading my dog. And you can read your dog like crazy off lead, as long as they're, you know, close enough working, you know, when they're problem solving. I lean on a tree and watch my dog work through whatever problem she's trying to solve, and it's liberating, because then you see I was able to identify that I would never have picked up on lead as I'm being dragged around in her problem solving, probably influencing her problem solving, not in a favorable way. I was able to sit back and determine she has this tendency. She'll circle left, maybe twice, you know, maybe a small circle, then a big circle. And then she'll come over to the other side and circle to the right. And I call it her clover leaf. And maybe it's not super pretty like that, but that's her tendency. She'll go one way. I think she's mostly left-handed, but not predominantly left-handed. And then she'll come, if she doesn't find it, she'll come to the other side. And the other thing that does, in my mind, that tells me where the line is. Because if she's coming here and then coming here, that line is right here. And she's circling off of the last spot she was confident was right here, because she's clover leafing off from that. And that's my interpretation of it. And if you think I'm wrong, for heaven's sakes, tell me, because I want to learn. But that's how I'm reading. That's how I've interpreted it. And it seems to be reasonably accurate, because that's how it is when I've known the line. But absolutely liberating to sit back and just let your dog do what the dog wants to do, as opposed to being inadvertently checked and going, whoops, okay, well, I got stopped here. Let me come over here now and look. Whoops, I got checked there. Let me come over here now and look. And then the problem solving starts to look just disjointed. A dog off lead seems to have, at least my masterful bloodhound and her artful problem solving, Kenny, seems to have a kind of a pattern to her problem solving.
Yep.
I call them bread knots, Matt, where it's just like
bread knots. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Figure eight, bread knots, clover leaves. Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah. So Nicole, yeah, that's awesome that you're able to do that, because you really get to see. And if your dog's not going to run off, or it has good enough recall, even on an on-lead state, it's good to do that, so you know, oh crap, I think it's starting its clover leaf. I need to, you know, follow it through, or whatever. It's bread knot or whatever. I don't know. So good stuff. Any other comments, Ethan?
I don't know if y'all just stuck with the reward at the end or not, or if y'all moved on, but I can tell you what I do. I try and build a reward event. Most of the time I have a piece of fleshed hide that I cover up a backpack, and it's got some goodies in it, usually either part of the hoof that I lopped off that I didn't use to track with. Sometimes it has a live hide in it, but I do that as just like a visual target, plus usually keeps stuff from walking off with my stuff. Like critters will come and rob me. But most of what I do is I'll just play with them, pet them, get them fired up at a high arousal state, and try and make it an event instead of just an object at the end. And it's an event that they share with me, and then it's always followed by hey, you're free to go. Like I kind of give them a break, and I just meander back through the woods and let them have access to the environment and engage with it how they see fit. Because, you know, during a track, there's all kinds of like competing motivators while they're out there trailing. And if you're never letting them go engage with the environment, and that continues to be novel in their mind, I think you're opening yourself up to fighting more. I'd rather check this out than this trail. I'd rather check this out than this trail. With some dogs, some dogs will just blister trails forever. They'll find it and they'll roll on to the next one. They don't care. But some of those dogs that maybe it's more like the environment competes more with their attention. If you can demonstrate a few times that they can access the environment by finishing this task, I found that to be a huge benefit to these kind of dogs that they're more inclined to go check out coon turds and roll around in them or whatever.
Yeah.
So I intentionally make that a part of it. The end of every one of my tracks is whatever we do, I'm fired up, giving them praise, patting them, and like, oh man, you're an awesome dog. You found the deer, and like, okay, break, and then we'll be off lead and just meander back to the truck, and that's
go do their thing.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing we do. Before we go to more questions, though, one thing we have not touched on is crittering and how to train for crittering.
Yes.
So there's two really good ways to train for crittering. The obvious one is age. The longer the track ages, especially overnight, the more critter contamination on that trail there is. The other aspect is you putting critter scent on the trail. So we collect things like squirrels, rabbits, snakes. We have hogs here, so we'll use hog hide or hooves, and we will create these challenges, these critter scent challenges along the trail to work them past that and teach them that leave it command.
Yeah.
So that's something I really want to touch on, because that's something that a lot of people overlook in their training.
You let them scratch the itch, as I call it. If they really feel like they need to put their nose on it, do you let them do it for a second and see?
Oh yeah, I'll let them try to go down that path, and then I'll correct them. Leave it with a quick snatch on the collar and leave it, and then correct them and try to refocus them. Now, what do you do if they won't? I ran across this. I was testing a dog in North Georgia on a UBT test, and we ended up running it at night. And we came to a creek crossing, and there was a lot of raccoons that traveled up and down that creek, and that dog was just all jacked up wanting to go after them. And I had several people on that test line with me, but anyways, I pulled the dog away from the area, just 30 yards or so, and I put it in a downstay, and I sat there petting the dog until I seen it calm down and its focus went away from that, and we reattached to the line and continued out.
So that downstay thing, I was first introduced to that on a track when I was, all distraught because I couldn't find what was supposed to have been an easy recovery and all of this. And I put a plea out there in my network and got a call right away from someone for whom I respect. He says, "What's going on?" So he says, "Go back to the line and put your dog in a downstay right on the line, and don't acknowledge it. Don't do anything. And until she looks like she's ready to go, and then go." And Kenny, I did that, and it was an entirely different dog. She calmed down, but it was right on the line. So I do that still today. If we have to do a restart and she seems a little frantic and hectic, I'll go back to last blood or the hit site, wherever we want to go back to. I'll just do that. I'll put her there, and it works. So that downstay, that's real, man. That's a good one.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you, not trying to boost myself up here, because I'm not at all. I don't think the average handler would have passed that test with that dog that night.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I nearly didn't, and I've handled a lot of dogs on a lot of tests. And that, let me tell you, that dog right there, it was a struggle to get it to calm down. And I literally had to physically restrain that dog. When I'm talking downstay, this isn't a trained downstay.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, neither's mine.
I had to physically restrain this dog until it just finally relaxed. And even then I waited longer until it just fully, like, basically melted in my arms. And I'm like, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
And then we hit another spot with the same thing, same thing. And I'm looking at the hide at the end. It was literally a whole deer hide with the head and all hanging from the tree. And the dog hit the raccoon scent and took a 90 to the right. And I know the hide's to the left, but I'm not allowed to steer the dog to it. So I did the same thing. I brought it back to the line and put it in a downstay, let it calm down. Went back, and sure enough, the dog went to the left, went right to the hide.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised at their sense of spatial awareness too. You talk about downing them right on odor. But I've been like, they've drifted way off, and I'm just like, all right, chill, whether they're crittering or just disengaging in some other way. And if you take that boiling water off the stove and let it cool down, and you tell them to find it again, you'd be surprised a lot of times that they're just like, okay, I guess I'll go back to the line, and that, like, they know exactly where it is, and that makes you want to pull your hair out.
Oh yeah.
But I'll say that the only variation of what I do and what Kenny does is maybe just the terminology, and I use the word no. And to me, the benefit of that is because I've worked obedience and I've conditioned that word to actually have meaning, So like they've understood that no there's gonna be a consequence after that, enough that they're less likely to do it just by hearing the word no. And so what I'm trying to communicate to them is, like, this thing, disengaging from this task, is not allowed. And over time they do less and less of that. But the exact same technique, and I mean, I think the English doesn't matter. It's what's happening is that verbal cue followed by something that's, aversive, to make them be like, well, doing that is not as fun as not doing that. But yeah, I let them travel a little ways, and a lot of times, especially early on, I give them an opportunity to re-engage with the track before I give that quote unquote correction or feedback to them, because I am within reason fine with the dog checking out something and then going back to work. I'm cool with it. That's a good decision in my book. I'm not always there to give immediate and appropriate feedback, but when they start to fixate and I can tell it, I'm gonna before loading up the lead or anything. This is why I like on lead. Is I'll say no and then give a good pop on it. And by putting that on cue with no, that prevents eroding, or that prevents any issues with accidentally stepping on the lead or getting stuck around the tree or anything, because you're not applying that verbal cue to it as well when you're mishandling the lead on accident. You're not saying, hey, no, stop tracking just because I tripped over the lead. You're being very clear that this is something different than you're supposed to be doing, and I want you to do less.
Yeah, I got it.
That's right.
Yep.
So sorry, that's just something that really needed to be covered because it's not trained enough.
I agree. You got
another thing we do is, like, we have different areas that have different types of critters in high population. One of our biggest areas, especially the briars, is we train a lot around rabbits. Rabbits, I don't know what it is about a rabbit, but most dogs want to chase them. Squirrels is another one. So keep that in mind.
Cool. Go back to questions and comments.
Yes.
Calvin Dennis says, either of you trained a Parsons Russell or Jack Russell?
I've trained numerous Jack Russells.
What about you, Ethan?
No, neither of those breeds. I've got a Jack Russell coming in June now.
Cool. What's your comment on them, Kenny?
They're terriers.
Yeah, it's you're in for a ride if you get one. They're good at it. They're good at it, but obedience. Spend a lot of time on obedience.
So, I mean, are they like a lot of the other terriers where they're just fired up about stuff? Motion activated.
Oh yeah.
Calvin, I've never tracked with Calvin, but he sent me some videos last week or this weekend about Willow, and fired up is a good would be a good way to put it.
My neighbor has one, and she's
and you better work on that critter training.
Yeah, you'll be trying to get them from chasing a rabbit for like hours, or at least the jags.
But that's a breed characteristic. We were kind of talking about that this morning in the judges chat. You know, knowing breed characteristics. Not everything is exactly the same, but breeds have general characteristics or general tendencies, and terriers tend to be susceptible to crittering. I mean, it's just a fact of the matter, right?
Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's just something that you should understand and be aware of. Not saying don't get one, just know that is an element that you need to be aware of and may have to spend extra time training through. It's just something.
Yeah, I mean, the only dog I tell people not to get is a bloodhound. No. No,
yeah, that's why I don't refer people to Mullins.
No, I'm joking. I train a lot.
I know
they
you're
are
kidding.
Good.
I know you're kidding.
But I do want to say this, and I've said it many, many times. If you ever have any questions about breeds and you are thinking about getting a breed, give me a call, because I have probably trained one at some point. And, you know, while I'm on that, you know, on another podcast, One Track Mind podcast, they asked me how many dogs I trained, and, you know, I'd stated 2,000. Well, someone asked me about that, and, you know, have I had 2,000 dogs come through my kennel for full training? No. It's when I say that, it's not just for a full beginning to end training. It may be, you know, working on a specific scenario, or we offer virtual training, and, you know, someone said, well, that's consulting. Well, the end result is I gave the instructions to train that dog. So that's what I meant by that. I wanted to clarify that, but regardless, that means I've been actively involved in the training of many different breeds.
Yep. Yeah, Kenny, I think you already commented. As Lindsay says, her ankle still hurt. She has buck braids. I think you mentioned that.
Yep.
Matthew Lord, any tips to keep your dog as interested in practice lines as the real thing?
Get out there and work your dog.
Yeah.
You know, I get that all the time. My dog won't take a real track or a mock track, and your dog won't take a mock track because you're not working the mock tracks is what it boils down to. And I've been guilty of that in the past myself. I'll admit it. But keep it fun, vary things up. Don't make every track the same. Not everything has to be 24 hours old and 800 yards. You know, challenge the dog on every line you lay.
Yep.
Yeah. We I tell folks all the time, like that's why I like training on lead. It's like they can tell, especially after they've had a good season of, you know, getting to grab a hold of deer and, you know, chew on booty and what have you. They can tell the difference in a training line and the real thing, and they're like, it's not for me. But that's why I like an element of obedience. I'm like, you're gonna do it anyways. And after a few reps of like holding them accountable, you can drive a lot of fun into it for them. And part of that again is like, how are you structuring the rewarding side of it? How are you? Because I don't like boring, you know, myself. You know, I'll play with Legos sometimes if it's fun. If you Legos, that makes
we're sense. Losing you. There you are.
Yeah. You were garbled, but we heard that you play with Legos. So
that's the front
no.
I play with
but
Legos.
I know what you mean. You're going to variety, mix up the reward.
Sure,
you know, things get wore out. So
most of the time, dog, when you hear that a dog is getting bored because you're not challenging the dog.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would say I would add a flavor to that of you're potentially allowing them to find something more fun out there in the woods. Like especially if you're trying mock trails again off lead and you don't have good control of your dog or the environment, and they get out there and they're just like, I'm just going to go fart around, and you allow it, then you're just creating bad behaviors too. I mean, again, it could stem from this isn't challenging enough, but also I would say an obedience element as well. Because like my dog doesn't always want to sit when I ask it to, but I expect it to.
And I do want to say that when we answer these questions, we're not only just answering them directly for that particular person, we are adding in things that may help someone else. So
100%. And I want to read Larry's, and then what you said just made me think of something that I want to ask that I don't think is here. So let me read Larry's. Do you leave a reward when they reach the end of the line? I normally leave a deer leg, but he doesn't seem to get excited once he finds it. He wants to get on to the next track.
I like those dogs.
It's like he doesn't want to be over. He's got to have a bloodhound.
He does. I've worked with that dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just the thing. I mean, we do put, like Ethan said, typically like we'll use the upper section of the leg that we cut off when we trim the hooves. We'll hang that up at the end is what we use most of the time. We may use a piece of hide, but I like using that upper part of the leg for one. It doesn't go to waste then, and it lasts longer. It doesn't get stinky and spoil as quick. But a lot of dogs, they don't care. That's nothing to be concerned about.
As long as it tracks, right?
I've got a black mouth out here. He'll when I let him go, he'll go start running the track again for fun. He could care less what's at the end of it, and I'm fine with it.
Yeah, as long as he tracks. So I'll tell you what I do, Larry. And I also have a bloodhound, and when we track real deer, she for the large part doesn't care about the deer when we get there. She kind of does, might lick it, but really doesn't care. She cares about the track, and if it's too easy, she's looking for the next thing to track, even in the real world. But what I do is just like Kenny says, I take the cut off the upper part of the leg when you trim the hooves. I put that out there, and then I leave at the end of the line. I have a little tiny glass jar with and I punched holes in the lid like you did when you were a kid with your lightning bugs, And then I put 2 or 3, little chunks of deer liver in there, and I leave that at the end of the line. And so she gets to the end of the line. She can't get the prize. She can't get the liver chunks until I get there to open them for her. A lot of times she'll come back to me and say, "Dad, let's get to these liver chunks," And then after she eats her chunks, we play the game, this little fetch tug game with that deer leg. I mean, that's her favorite thing in the whole world in that moment. She wants me to throw that leg. And as I'm walking back to the house, I'll hold on to it and I won't throw it and I won't let her have it. And she gets all kinds of crabby and starts barking at me until I throw it. Then I whip it and she goes, gets it, carries it around for a while and just prances around like there is nothing better in the world. That's how my dog does it, but that's what I do. She doesn't care about a hide. Yeah, she recognizes it as the target. She doesn't really want to pick it up. She want to tug it. She wants her liver treat, and then she wants to play fetch and with that deer leg. And I probably conditioned that with her, But that's how we do it, and that's her favorite thing in the whole world at that moment.
I play tag with a bunch of dogs. It's a good.
That's time. Pretty typical bloodhound, to be honest. Yeah. You do have some that'll get excited and they'll chew on the deer, but for the most part, like my old bloodhound buddy, he would literally lay down and cross his legs like that and lay down at every deer. It was like he was posing for a picture.
Yeah, it was like, all right, I did my job. Yeah, and I have zero problem with that, man. As long as they want to stay on the line and find it, I don't care that they don't care about the deer when they get there. They did their job. They found it.
Yep.
Cool. So what I wanted to ask you guys, and this has been a debated topic in our network chat periodically, is there ever a time, and Ethan, maybe there is, because I think you kind of described it, but let's talk about it as a dog that's, got a year or two under its belt, or maybe it's its first year, but, not first being introduced to tracking training. is there ever a time where the dog is just struggling such that it's time to say today's not the day and head back to the house? Or so comment on that, Kenny. You're saying yes.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, the dogs have bad days just like we do. And even on real tracks, that's why I take multiple dogs. Some dogs just it's just not their day. And we will have dogs that kind of just shut down on us sometimes in training. And I don't know why. It's not like we're did anything to do it, but sometimes they just don't want to do it. And you put them in a kennel next to the dogs that you're getting out, loading in the box or loading in the trailer, and you're taking them, and they want to go. And
doggy FOMO.
Yeah, sometimes I'll let them not go a day or maybe even 2 days, and then when you get them out, it's like they're ready to run.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of my best tools in my pocket. Is like it's in my handler guide I give to clients and everything. And like if it's not happening, just like dispassionately leash them up and go home. Try again. And that seems to, at most we go 2 days. I'll try again the next day. Same thing. We just leash them up and go home, and they're like, "Oh, okay. I have no option but doing this," and they start having fun with it. It's not like we just force them to do it, but they don't have access to anything else.
Yeah, because that's I'll call it the debate, because I think it's more than a discussion. Often it turns into a debate, is whether you pack them up and go home, or you make them, whatever make them means, get to the end of that line. And I guess it depends on, too, is it just an old stubborn grizzled veteran dog that knows that knows what he's doing and just doesn't want to, but will, when you finally say get to work enough, he'll say fine, pout his way to the end of the line, versus maybe a younger dog that just ain't having it that day. I don't know.
Well, I'm just gonna be honest, I hardly work my older dogs that are
season. Yeah, we talked about that before too. Listen, man, we're over 2 hours, and this is great, but there's some more comments we got to get to.
I'm good to keep going if y'all are.
Okay, no, I am too. I just let's look at Chris Johnson here. Layden ran 4 season practice tests this weekend with the same hooves in same types of environments, and the first one each day. He struggled, but he would smoke the other 2 in 20 minutes. Reasons why? ?
Kind of need some more information on that one. How old were they? When were they laid? Same type of environments. What was the environments? What was the conditions? What was the ambient temperature? And there's a lot that could go on. I mean, that's kind of hard to answer.
Yep, I agree. But all those environment factors play in, Chris. Thermals lifting and settling, and whatever, moisture versus dry. I don't know.
Yeah, but, what does struggle look like? Were they like just too juiced up to be outside and having a big time, and they maybe burn some energy on that first one at the mercy of not doing a good job, and then.
And you see that a lot, especially when it's cooler out and you first get them out of the box. They're jacked up and want to run all over the place.
That's when you're going to lose a dog. Cold snap.
Yeah, especially like I get my dogs out of that first cold snap in the season. I get them out of the box and they're just running around like crazy. And then the hunters look at me like, "What is this dog doing?" I'm like, "I just got to get it out of its system."
Yeah, just let it be.
Yeah, that's interesting. Talking, a Florida guy and an Arkansas guy talking about a cold snap, and I don't mean that as the seasonal banter. I mean that as, I haven't recognized that a cold snap impacts the way my dog tracks, and I don't know if we've ever had much discussion about it. So I'm wondering if it's regional, where your dogs down there are used to 80 all the time, and 40 or 30 or 25 is a hell of a cold snap, and it just really impacts them differently.
Yeah. Well, today.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead. Today was like the first time we were up in the 80s, and one of the times I aired kennels out, like 3 of the dogs just went outside, and normally they just start big time playing, and like 3 of them just went outside, like got them a drink of water and just laid in the sun. Yeah, the opposite of that. It's just like they're hot and they're just like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go sit down. Yeah, it's warm.
Yeah, and I mean, there's times we'll have 30, 40 degree temp swings in one day.
Yeah.
You know, that's a lot. You know,
that is a lot. I agree. Yeah, that's interesting because I do know when I run on tracks during the week in the evenings after work, and Baru's been in her kennel all day long, that track can kind of be a pain in the ass sometimes. Yeah. You know, when when I've got to get her loaded up and go, you know, and she hasn't had a chance to be out and run around, it takes a little bit to de-spaz on that first line. So, Chris, maybe there's something like that. But that's interesting. Something to just be mindful of as you're running those lines. Courtney DeMello, training for backtracking. If you already talked about it, I got a little late, so I will go back and watch things. So backtrack training, Kenny.
I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, I don't think there's anything to it. Most dogs just bypass it.
I was gonna say, I tried to get them to engage with it sometimes, and occasionally they will, you know, miss the turn, quote unquote, that is, you know, technically the backtrack, but most of the time they're not engaging with that when I lay it, unless it's ridiculous backtrack. And I like the best way I've found so far is kind of like you trying to get your bloodhound situation, him to notice that he's out of that scent cone. I've been like real obnoxious leading up to it, real obnoxious going back, and then like I'm just like, you know,
looks like he's prowling like a cat burglar.
I was thinking prowling like a cat. Legos. Yeah. Now he's identifying as a cat.
You're doing his Lady Gaga. I don't know. You froze again, Ethan.
I saw that.
We had a lot of fun picking on you.
Y'all disappeared. No. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I made obnoxious, like the part I'm trying to suck them into, the challenge part of it, because I wanted to go past the exit of the backtrack. And then that's what I was doing. My Pink Panther here is like, I'm going to tiptoe out of that line to where they're going to have more of an inclination to skip the exit of the backtrack and go down the line and basically find that it ends. Granted,
it doesn't work very often though, does it?
No. And if you're working scent gaps a lot, you have dogs that just keep progressing out this way and never really back. So, I mean, I want them. I feel as though as a handler, I can double check that, and I don't notice needing to do that in the field. I'm not saying whether backtracks exist at a frequency that matters or not, but I don't notice having to help handle out of that. But I would feel as though that's a tool in my problem solving toolkit. Is like, you know, if we're not getting out of this problem area, I'm going to go back down the line. We had one, from everything I could tell, legitimate backtrack from basically where a deer bedded and then just exited out after a period and went back, I mean, hundreds of yards a different direction. And it was an hour of like working backwards a couple hundred yards. But other than that, most of our problem areas are seemingly, when I try and set it up, they don't engage with it in the way that I would feel like they would need to come away with a skill from it, if that makes any sense.
And honestly, out of thousands of tracks, I've honestly had one legitimate backtrack that I know of. I actually couldn't even go on it. I got the call, and at the time I was working at the paper mill, and I got the call, and I called another tracker, and his dog was down, and he said, "Hey, if your wife can bring me your dogs, I will run the track." And my wife did. She drove 45 minutes, met my friend Trent at the track, and when he let the dogs out of the box, they tried to go across the road, and he redirected them and started them on the hit site. They went in 80 yards, turned around, trailed exactly step for step back to the truck. He thought they were just going to the truck. He tried to restart them. They did the same thing, went back. He's like, I don't know what's going on. He loaded the dogs up, and the hunter found the deer the other side of the road about 30 yards in where the dogs were trying to go to begin with. But he didn't know my dogs. At least he put forth the effort. But that's the only legitimate, step for step back trail that I can confirm.
Well, on staying on the topic of backtracks, Courtney again. How do you know if the deer backtracked or if the scent is stronger closer to the hit site because the pheromones are gone?
I'm
not sure I'm entirely following that second part.
Yeah,
but
I'm not understanding that one.
Courtney, try again. See if you can clarify your question. But I want to come down here because it's a follow-up to Chris Johnson's second track. He clarifies 8 hours old, late early mornings, ran with within an hour of each other. So going back to how come the dog is not so great on one and smokes the second one. That's a little more deep.
So the key there is early morning. He ran the first one. So early morning, the ambient temperature is starting to rise. The thermals are starting to rise. The scent is starting to rise. So of course the second one's going to be a little easier.
So he's saying he laid them early morning and ran.
No, they were 8 hours old. He ran them early morning.
Oh, okay.
And he ran one an hour after the other. And if I'm reading this right, it struggled on the first one and smoked the second one.
Yeah.
So I interpreted that as laid them early morning.
Yeah, that's what it says. Ran within an hour.
I'm sorry. Okay.
So he's running them in the afternoon within an hour.
I've totally seen sometimes 2 to 5 p.m. in those hotter months where I don't know if it's humidity or what, their ease of going through something is a whole lot better a couple hours later than during that, that rough time for whatever reason. And you may know more about that, but I've always assumed something to do with humidity and maybe temperature, but there can be to me, it seems like from out here, 2 p.m. to 4 or 5 p.m., it's like they slow way down. I mean, they stay engaged and they get through it, and it seems to be no issue. But if you're perplexed by yesterday in the morning we ran this track and he blistered it, and today we ran one, and it's just what happened to my dog? I mean, it looks different for sure.
So there's just so much. There's so much it could be. It's hard to answer that one without actually knowing. I mean, was one of them more in the direct sunlight than the other for the majority of the trail? There's a lot that can go on there. That's a tough one to answer on this.
Here's an important one. Larry says, Larry again, so I'm going to have to find another way to spend my Tuesday nights with all the bloodhound hate, Kenny. Larry, I've got your back, brother. Stay. Ethan has a bloodhound too, so Kenny is outnumbered.
Hey, I've had bloodhounds and I worked his dog, so it counts for something.
That's okay.
He's not the dog I reached
for. I love my bloodhound with all my heart. She's a pain in the ass. I love her to death.
I love that your bloodhound is with you.
What's that?
I love that your bloodhound is with you.
And me too. What techniques do you use for rabbits? We have a bunch in our yard and property. That is her kryptonite. Do I let her be a dog on our property and discourage it 100% of the time? And how? So do you let her run it, or do you try
my dogs will chase them. My dogs will chase them in the yard, and I just let them chase them in the yard. But they know when it's tracking time, they better not mess with them.
Yeah, I let my dogs. I let them engage with wildlife in the yard. I think they're smart. Most dogs. I mean, there's some high fur drive breeds that I could see that reinforcement being more difficult than other dogs. But I would say my experience is personally that you can set that context well enough that just like you're allowed to pee in the grass but not on the carpet. The same thing is peeing in both scenarios. One's allowed, one's not. And I think that goes to how clearly have you communicated the standards of our tracking and what that task looks like. Because my dogs will trash all kinds of stuff for fun in the woods and in the backyard, and I'm out there like, oh, yeah, I'll get him, whatever, having a good time. And then tracking, I just don't see it pop up as an issue.
Yeah, because they can apply context.
Sure.
Yep. That was another discussion point in our network, and the woods walks, when I'm just taking her, letting, like, your phrase, Ethan, letting her engage with the environment. I'll let her sniff around. I'll let her sniff up around the coon tree and stuff for a few minutes, let her scratch that itch. Then it's like, all right, leave it. Let's go. Sure. I won't let her chase a rabbit, and I don't know if she necessarily would. I don't want her chasing a rabbit because I don't want to inspire the fun of the chase. But that's just me. But sniffing around and looking up the tree where the coon just scramble up.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I meant. They're not actively chasing rabbits in my yard because the rabbits, they get gone quick. But they'll run around and trail them.
Yeah. One of my governing approaches, I guess, is like I try and give my dogs so much freedom in that environment that they don't crave it when we're on task. With the caveat of like understanding what's reinforcing to dogs internally. Like some dogs just chasing a squirrel is highly reinforcing, and you're paddling upstream if you let them for too long or too often. But overall, I let them rip in the woods and don't seem to have many issues.
This brings back another point of why I don't recommend training dogs in your yard.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, we're getting down there. Let's come down here to Michael Beck. Question: do you guys notice a difference during the rut in your dog's tracking behaviors? This is also discussed a lot. The woods are flooded with different aromas and deer movement increases. I try to combat this in the off season by laying lines in high density areas. Is there anything else that can be done?
Yeah. So one thing I recommend is put a feeder out and run training lines through that feeder, because there's going to be deer coming to it. There's going to be all kinds of animals coming to it, but run it right through there. In fact, I went on I think I shared this with some of you guys, but I went on a UBT2 test at Chad Tate's house, and we're sitting at his house, and he's pointing out across the pond and behind his house, he's pointing out this feeder and talking about there was, I can't remember, it was like 30 or 60 deer. I mean, I know that's a big difference, but it was a bunch of deer at that feeder that morning. And then he was pointing over at another feeder, same thing. There was like 30 deer at that one that morning. And he ran the test line right through both of those, and then into a 3D target range. And he put me to the test, but we were prepared for it. Yeah. And how do we prepare for it? Just like you talked about, high density areas, run training lines through high density areas. And the best way to do that is a feeder or food plot, that deer are frequenting.
Yep. So Courtney's kind of clarified a little bit here. So a dog will track away from the hit site, but will then turn around and go back towards the hit site. If we are saying that rarely deer are backtracking, the scent is stronger closer to the hit site. So likely he's turning around because the scent is stronger, and that's what that just jumped in, and that's what he's following.
So I don't think he's going back because the scent's stronger. He's going back trying to work it out. Likely that deer is still alive and not fatally wounded, and he's just trying to problem solve and work it out.
Just resetting himself. Baru does that all the time now.
Yep.
I have to seldom do my own resets because off lead, she just, when she needs to, she'll reset herself.
Oh yeah, I see smoke coming out of Ethan's ears here.
What? Go ahead, Ethan.
Oh, I was giggling about something in my head. Like I've had people be like, after 5 minutes of watching my dog fart around the hit site, like trying to work something out. They're like, "Who have I called?" And then all of a sudden he'll be like, "Oh, okay." And then 20 minutes later, we're 800 yards away. It's like, "Oh, there's your deer."
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
suspect Kenny's more fluent on like the signal or pheromones, I guess, but I suspect there's an adrenaline dump off of the deer that blast out of that hit site when something startles them. Because I definitely have noticed different trailing behavior in the first 60 to 100 yards on even like dead deer, live deer, the wrong deer, a deer that was just in that area. They seem to want to piece together through that first spot a lot more, and it seems like they always have this distance that they check out before they kind of give that crispy, "Hey, this deer's not dead" thing. And I suspect
Right.
some of that is because of some sort of adrenaline dump to being startled, and maybe adrenaline dump's not the right word. And I
Alert
think also
pheromones.
Scent
okay,
dump. Yeah,
An alert pheromone.
alert pheromones, yeah, and that's something maybe y'all can give me something I've just seemingly observed. I could be wrong, but like those backstrap hits where deer just absolutely dump on the ground, my dogs quit on those most of the time. All this is just most of the time, I guess. But my dogs quit on those way faster than anything else, and I wonder if like because their alert happens, but they're paralyzed to not leave a line of it shooting off through the woods, that the dogs are like, I don't know, there's just healthy deer here. By the time it gets its bearings, it's like the water has stopped boiling, and they just kind of meander off, and they smell like a healthy deer.
Right.
Is my guess. Maybe.
No, you're spot on.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah.
So alert pheromones is what you.
Yeah. So you ever seen you ever been hunting and had a deer stomp at you?
Sure. Yeah.
That's an alert pheromone.
Okay.
There's danger in the area.
Yep.
Yeah, because I've seen my dog investigate a deer that wasn't shot more than the deer that was grazed, and it was during the rut, just barely grazed, little hair, little skin. Saw him back on camera. It just like grazed the inside of its flank. And he was more inclined to investigate the other doe that was with him, and I wonder if he was juiced up rutting and the doe was way more startled than he was, and he's like, man, this is probably the one I'm supposed to be tracking. I mean, he eventually just kind of like quit on both of them. But he was definitely checking out the doe way more. Like he followed the buck, and we're like, here's blood. And he's like, nah, went and checked out the doe and was doing bread knots and then just quit.
Typically, it's within 200 yards.
Yeah.
On average.
Yeah. I call them quick refusals and slow refusals. I guess there's those deer that are hit pretty bad, but they're going to make it, that sometimes my dog, I find him turning into a search mode and then eventually kind of giving that refusal after a few hundred yards, but most of the time it's pretty quick and crispy.
So I want to go back to Michael Beck's for a second.
Yeah.
Talking about, do you notice the difference during the rut and dogs tracking behavior? One thing you have to remember, especially during the rut, especially when the deer are locked down. So you have an injured deer that is locked down with a healthy deer, and they are bedding up together. And one will get up and leave with that scent all over it. And I've said this before, time and time again. I said it to Ralph, and Ralph, he really preaches it now. Especially you off lead guys, if your dogs jump and run, you better check out where they jumped at, because I can tell you many, many times they get to a deer that is dead, another deer is bedded with it, and they go after that one because all that scent's there, and then they see that live one running, and too many times people's cut the corner thinking that their dog was on it, and that deer was laying dead right there. Yeah. And I experienced a really good example of this one. Is I was tracking deer. Actually, it was one Randy Vick referred to me. And we get in there, and the guys told me they shot a big buck, and they were drunk as could be. And we get in there. This is in South Georgia. The dog, my dog Xena, jumps the deer. It runs by us, and it's a doe with blood all over its side. And I turned to the guy, I said, I thought you said you shot a buck. He said, I did, a big buck. I said, well, there's a bloody deer running by. My dog's on it, and we've been following this blood trail. And he's like, I'm telling you it was a buck. Well, about 200, 250 yards. She just quit on it and came back, and she reset herself on the line. And sure enough, we ended up trailing to the buck. It was still alive. I mean, she ran a little ways, baited up, and we were able to dispatch it. But that was my eye-opening experience right there, where if we wouldn't have been there to see that doe run by, I would have just left that deer in the woods.
And the blood on the doe was from bedding with a wounded buck.
Yep.
Probably liver shot.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow. I think
it was the rut, and the buck was locked down with that doe.
Yep.
So another scenario to keep in mind.
Yeah. And the first time I ever heard that was Ralph talking about it on a live stream. And I'm like, wow, that was, and you've mentioned it several times since then. So that is in my arsenal of things to be aware of.
Yeah. And it's going to impact the off lead trackers more so than the on lead trackers.
Yep.
But it can happen on lead, especially if they're in thick brush and it just comes busting out, and you kind of bypass that thick brush because you've seen deer come out. So keep that in mind. Always check where you jumped.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. Guys, I think we've pretty well picked through most of these questions of substance. And then, guys, we do appreciate you commenting and putting questions out there. It really does drive for some great conversation. The last one in here, let's put it up there. John Arthur, awesome info tonight. Thanks. So appreciate it. Courtney, you're welcome. Courtney says thank you too. So yeah, we really appreciate it, guys, because your engagement really really makes for some great conversation. Kenny, Ethan, any last minute things that you want to revisit, cover?
Yeah, not on here. I had someone call me right before the live stream. We were on the phone for quite a while, and this individual is basically just pretty much begging for help. Just not really receiving the help in the area. There's just not a lot of trackers in the area. Anyways, long story short, his dog, he's getting frustrated. He sent me some videos, and the dog will engage on some pretty good lines, some older stuff, and then one day it just doesn't want to track, and or it'll track 400 or 500 yards and then just quit. So he was asking for advice. I gave him some advice. You have anything you want to share on that, Ethan?
Yeah, start with looking at like what's your relationship with the dog. But if that's solid, my thought is if they're on lead.
Yeah, on lead.
Okay. And it's just like disengaging halfway through, or just not engaging at all at the beginning?
Sometimes 3/4 of the way through, sometimes not at the beginning.
And just straight up like stopping and hanging out, or like going for a
stroll? It'll just completely stop and sit down.
I got you. What breed is it?
Catahoula,
huh?
2 years old.
How old?
2 years old. Well, 2.5, almost 3.
I don't have experience with the Catahoula quitting like that. I've had a lab just be like, not for me. And we bust out the fun bumper. I got pictures of this dog finding elk and their handlers holding the fun bumper. He'll be like, oh, there's the elk. Now where's my bumper? But no, as far as the Catahoula,
you pretty much nailed it without me giving you all the details. That's why I wanted to bring this up. There's some relationship issues there with the dog and handler. And we had this conversation with this individual. So I'm not saying anything, but basically my recommendation was go back to the basics and start over.
Yeah. So I have headbutted with my GSP some and saw the makings of him shutting down because the task was what I call poisoned with him because of me. And that was repaired not in the woods. That was, I mean, you can ask my clients. I'm like, man, I'll leave that dog in the crate, and busted him out again, and we got it rolling again. But yeah, we started having that. I mean, he got into a neurotic state. I had a really, really bad moment with him of just getting a little frustrated, and he was way soft, and just partially from where he came from, he was kind of a little rescue-ish, good folks that didn't know how to handle a GSP, basically. No abuse or anything, but abuse in his eyes because he didn't get to run around and run a gabillion yards every day and hunt stuff. But yeah, I started seeing the makings of that, where like he just kind of quit on a track, and then the next time I could tell he was not excited, and I was like, let's just leave this alone. And I just hung out with him, took him on adventures, and we busted out the leash and walked around on my obstacle course, did small challenges, worked on our relationship really. And I felt I just kind of regained a little trust, went back out there and ran some tracks with him again. Now, guilty, I didn't track with him a whole lot in this season again. But he'll run training tracks with me, and we found some deer with him before, but that absolutely started to happen with me. And I've also seen some Lacey's where they just perceive pressure and shut down, even though like I'm not doing anything but like reaching around the tree to grab the line. They're like, you're trying to kill me, Uncle Ethan. Like, why would you do that? You're like, I'm just grabbing the lead, dude. So that's my experience with that, and that was just a relationship mending process with my GSP that was pretty basic, and none of it happened with tracking. I wanted to make sure I didn't add any pressure to tracking or conflict between me and him, and it was pretty straightforward. Be someone cool they want to hang out with, and they'll do cool things with you.
Yeah, and you pretty much nailed it. So the person said, I get frustrated, I've taken out on the dog. Well, that creates the dog to shut down. And I intentionally was pretty vague with the descriptions I shared, but I just wanted to see if you could nail it, because that's exactly what I told him, and actually another experienced tracker had told him as well. So I think he's watching this. I'm not going to say names or anything, but do what we talked about.
So nice little kudos here. Definitely say Caleb Abel says definitely saving these to a list to listen to again this fall and go back for reference. Awesome job. Thank you for sharing your experiences and knowledge. There you go, guys.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate
and
it.
Michael Beck, what meds you suggest for a young GSP? Whew.
Oh yeah. Trazodone.
Hey, all I can say, Michael, is I told you so.
So, Kenny, feel free to send me every GSP you don't want. I've had a lot of success getting into.
Oh, I have too. Tracks. I just
they're definitely sailing into the wind at times, though.
Oh, give them all that freaking GSP hate you want. Get some off my goddamn bloodhound.
Don't send me bloodhounds.
No, he said don't send me bloodhounds. No, I mean, I've trained some great GSPs, but again, they're not the right breed for everyone. And that's what you have to remember.
Yeah. He says, just kidding. He's a blast. Yeah, we know Vidar's a.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Kidding, not kidding.
I mean, they're a handful. I mean, I have to get. I mean, mine lives in the house with me. He hangs out, but I mean, I have to get him so much enrichment, and not just like roading him. Like that's not enough mentally to just run a bazillion miles.
Yeah, no, they need. Yeah,
he's got to run out and hunt and point everything. I don't know. He just takes a lot. Super cool dog though.
So another last minute question that came in is, what's your tactics on handling a more timid dog versus a high drive dog?
You asking me?
Yep.
I'm just reading the question, and I'll answer it too. But go ahead.
No, maybe you better go ahead. He's doing his mannequin impression again.
Did I stump him?
No.
Yeah,
can you hear me?
You're back now, Ethan. Okay, go ahead.
I stumped him. No.
Oh, yeah. You froze up, dude. How do you handle those soft dogs?
I heard the question handling timid dogs versus those higher drive dogs.
In training.
Yep.
So again, for me, I've had a lot of success building a little more mental resilience and generalizing things and objects and just being handled, not in the woods on tracks. I'm a big nerd. I've got like an obstacle course at my house. And you can freeze up some of these dogs just like, hey, climb up this lawnmower ramp, and they're like, dude, that's gonna kill me, Uncle Ethan. I'm not doing it. And you can get experience with them being handled and them perceiving pressure and them being stressed out, achieving it, and seeing that it's not a big deal. You're not going to beat them. It's not the end of the world. It's cool. You'll actually get a reward for doing it, and it's okay. And we've gotten pretty good results doing that. And then as far as in the woods on the tracks, I am trying to not reinforce their sense of being alert or thinking things are weird and amiss. So like if I'll try and explain this, but like some dogs, if they're like on high alert and then like you make a big deal out of it, just like a kid falling on the ground, if you freak out, they freak out. If they're on high alert or overwhelmed with the environment or overwhelmed with the gear you've put on them or overwhelmed with seemingly this pressure you're putting on them, you've got to be conscientious of that and either not reinforce that inadvertently or generalize all kinds of things to make them less and less and less sensitive to novel things, novel situations, and I guess you, the handler. But yeah, I've been around some weird soft dogs. You know, that dog you met, Kenny Lulu, that I brought to Alabama. She's cool. She'll charge a hippopotamus in Africa, but then if you're like, hey Lulu, you want to walk across this sidewalk? And she's like, I think I might die. And you're like, it's just a sidewalk. So it's just odd.
Right.
And Dakota, I turned around to Dakota. I was like, I promise I don't beat this dog. Like I didn't like. She got tangled up a little bit, and I like shook it, and like a limb moved, and she was like, whoa, like you're trying to kill me. I was like, I'm not trying to kill you, Lulu. We're just finding a deer. And I think that goes back to their relationship with you, and if you've never violated their expectations, that gets better over time is my experience. Now there's some dogs that are just like they're like debilitatingly anxious, and I don't know, that's behavioral specialty, I would assume. Beyond that, that's my take, my incoherent babbling.
Honestly, I'm not gonna personally have a dog like that.
Not the job for him.
That I'm going to work with. I mean, and then another one just came in, resource guarding at the deer.
So in true resource guarding, I've never dealt with that. I'll tell you what I do to get a high level of control around those high value items. Well, one, if you've got that problem, make sure you've been clear of that with other people in your tracking party, and don't set up the situation to be a dumpster fire or get somebody bit.
Yes.
But as far as like, this isn't maybe curing or counter conditioning resource guarding, but getting a high degree of control around those items is like one of the things I do use, like the live hides as a reward event is for that purpose, is like control around those crazy arousal states. And what I'll do is like tie them up where they got to get at least their front paws off the ground to engage with it. They'll start tugging and ripping and having a big time, and I'll just be like, hey, come. And then I'll reward them with letting them access it again. And they come and they comply, and they're in like a good mannered state. I'm like, okay, break. And they can go back and start firing off with it. And you get a bunch of reps of like just that element of control. And the farther they are away from that item, the less problems you're going to have with that. So that's more of maybe a management and control of the dog around it, not necessarily curing a resource guarding issue in its nature or its actual problem, but that is maybe a management solution for you. Real resource guarding is.
And then this person, they kind of elaborated, or it's not an issue. They can go take the deer, but no one else can come around. And I'm just going to say that is a liability. That's a major liability.
100%.
But you, like Jason Bell just said, quick and immediate correction. You have to take control of that situation. You have to let the dog know that is not acceptable, and you take that deer away. You give it to the hunter, and I'm not a fan of having a dog that is a liability, but if you do have a cable tree lead, and tell the people, like you said, let them know in advance. Hey, when we get up there, you stay back, get your dog and attach it to that tree, take that deer away and give it to the hunter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a big one. But I don't think I had any more come in.
Cool. Well, guys, I think we're there.
Yeah.
My wife just got home. My daughter had grandson number 3 yesterday, so they must have come home from the hospital. Thank you. Yeah, so I want to go talk to my lovely bride. So coming up on the next series, we've concluded training, right,
yes.
Kenny? Nothing else you want
to, for now.
For now, yes, of course. And of course the training questions can keep coming. We do go back through, and I don't answer questions because I'm just, like I said, I'm the pretty face, and Ethan and Kenny can answer the questions as they come. But coming up, we're going to start our testing series, short little testing series. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, buddy.
Which directly relates to training.
Which directly relates to training, exactly like you and I talked, Kenny. So what a perfect time to roll into the testing series. So beyond that, that we have some latitude, we have some things lined up, we have a lot of a long list of things to pick from. If you have a topic that interests you that you'd like to see us cover, shoot me a note. We can get it on the agenda at some point. I know we're going to bring some folks back, but we have a lot of things that are going to be fun to talk about. So, but next is the the testing series, which will be a lot of fun to talk about. Just bringing some understanding and thoughts behind the ABTA test protocols and philosophies. So that'll be a lot of fun. So, barring any last minute comment, guys, I think we're there.
Yeah.
Appreciate y'all.
I enjoyed this.
Yeah, this was a really good one. Longest one for me anyway, let's call it 3 hours. So guys, great stuff, man. Thank you much. More of the good, less of the bad. Until Tuesday, guys. Talk to you soon.